Manistee.
Here.
Councilmember Grabowski.
Here.
Councilmember Martin Pontiac. Interim City Manager and Finance Director. DPW Director.
Here.
Police Chief.
Here.
Fire Chief.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to comment on agenda-related items. Are there any citizens that would like to comment tonight? And where did the podium go?
You'll just have to talk loud. I moved it.
It'll be quick.
Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. Tonight we're interviewing for the position of city manager. We have Glenn Henderson here. Does council have any questions for Glenn before we get started?
I do. When are we allowed to ask maybe some individual questions that come to us?
At any time, that's your totally your discretion.
Okay.
I mean, you can, totally your discretion.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be,
Doesn't have to follow that whatsoever. It can be, or for you to follow questions or, sure.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions concerned about procedure? We'll probably follow the same procedures we did last time. Okay. Everybody good with that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Wayne, welcome. Take a deep breath. Relax.
Thank you.
It's going to be fun.
Good to know that.
We're going to allow about 60 minutes for the questions that we have. I'll be asking some, and each council member will be asking questions. At the end, we'll provide you with a time to ask us questions. And please bear in mind, you'll get 7 different answers. So, with that, your first question. You have undoubtedly done some significant research about our community and our organization. Why do you want to be city manager, to be our next city manager? And what unique background, skills, and experience do you possess that make you a success? Would make you successful here?
It's a pretty long question.
Yes.
I was attracted to your city. Let's use an example. You know, like you're taking a flight, and usually jets fly like 30,000 feet or above.
Can I interrupt you?
You speak in the microphone, please.
Go ahead, yeah. There you go.
Okay. I'm going to use an analogy. Like when I first looked at Manistee, found out the notice. You look at like an analogy of planes flying like 30,000 feet. So I'm looking at the macro view, and here you have your community. It's right on the water. You can't beat water on anyone who wouldn't want to live on the water. Then the size of the community is appropriate. Then you get also you have the hills. I'm very enjoyable of hills. It's up north. It's a great location. And one of the best part is being on the water. It's on the sunset part of the water, not the sunrise. So that was very important to me. But then when you get a little lower level, you look at things around, like you come up River Street, and you see all the beautiful businesses that look like they're very vibrant and growing. And you have the Vogue Theater that reopened a few years ago. That's pretty cool. And continuing on the city, you go down to beaches. You have beautiful beaches. Douglas Beach and First Street Beach is beautiful. There's a lot to take care of there. I'm surprised Jeff can manage it all, but apparently he does. And just throughout the community, it's very cool. Jeff was able to give me a drive-by or drive-around this afternoon, and I found it very enjoyable. And also, I walked around the community yesterday as well as today to explore a little bit more. So I know all that. Now, when you get down to lower level, the foot level, not literally on the level, but as close as you can, I looked at your city. I've looked at your website. I've looked at your documents. I've looked at what's gone on in the city in the last few years, and I don't see anything that hasn't been done right. It seems like the people in charge have been doing a good job for a long time, and it seems like it's humming along at a good pace. So from those perspectives, that's why I was attracted to coming here and working for the city. And as far as my abilities, I think I can work with you in economic development. I can work with you in finance, knowing funds and when to spend and when to hold back to grow your fund balance, as well as applying for grants and labor relations. I've had a good deal of experience with labor relations recently, although I did have some in the city government as well. But those are the fields I feel I would a sellout, as well as being a person who go out in the community and meet with individuals and be a person who's there for people when they need to talk with someone in city government.
Any follow-up questions?
Are you a joiner? Do you like to join civic groups?
I was once president of the Rotary Club in Algonac.
You were once president of what?
The Rotary Club in Algonac.
Okay.
And in my younger years, I was president of the JCs in Owasso. So I have in the past. Never joined the Lions, but I did enjoy their shrimp night right before Thanksgiving in Algonac all the time.
Well, we do have a lot of nonprofits, and we use a lot of volunteer help around the city. So it would be great if we hired somebody that could make the rounds.
Yeah, well, right now I'm involved with the state has the equivalent of United Way, where we have our own version of that, and for the 50,000 employees, and I'm part of the board of directors for that.
Great, thanks.
Any other follow-ups? From your resume, it appears you have a career filled with accomplishments. Tell us about two of which you are most proud.
I would say one of them would be I worked for the city of Algonac and the city of Harbor Beach. I was able to negotiate labor union contracts for those two units. It's the first time I had ever done that, but I had studied that in college and went out and learned how the process worked. And I think it went rather well. That I went out and got comparables from different communities, sat down and figured out what we wanted and what we wanted to take back, and was able to successfully negotiate with the steward as well as the union representatives that were representing those units. At a pretty young age, I felt pretty good about that. Another one would be, although it's not related here, when I worked for the first job in the state of Michigan, I worked with the refugee program. There, I worked close side by side with refugees. Michigan gets around, at that time, around 3,000, 3,500 refugees per year. They're looking for jobs, and the program that I worked for was responsible for ESL, English as a second language, teaching them that, and going out working with manufacturers to find them jobs that they could work at. And I found that very enjoyable.
Any follow-up? Seeing none, if offered the position, what will your first 3 months look like in Manistee?
I'll hit the road running. Looks like everything I've seen is, like I said, it's running top notch, and so I don't think there would be any changes there, but I would definitely go out, sit down with each council person on an individual basis, talk with them about what their needs are and what their vision was for the city as to why they ran for the council and became members. Then talk to the department heads and find out what's going on, the inner workings with them. And then I would reach out to the citizens. Walk the streets of River Street and look at the 150 or so businesses that are down in the DDA area. See if I can get contacts with those, talk to those individuals, talk with the Chamber of Commerce people, different organizations. Then with all your involvement with collaboration, I would like to reach out to at least the 2 immediate townships, as well as the county government and the school administration. Get to know them and find out what type of needs they have. And from there, I would get a basis on which direction to go. I know you have a lot of strategic plans. I would like to look at those. It looks like they're pretty straightforward and comprehensive, and see how they're progressing and pick up where it was left off and make sure that they're carried out.
First day on the job, who are the first people you're going to meet with?
It would be you.
Okay.
Then it would be the department heads, and then I would set aside for all the different council people. I don't think that would be able to be accomplished in one day, but I think that would be the priority to do it.
Okay. Tell us about a poor professional decision you made, or about a time you may have failed as a leader. This could include a time when you were fired or asked to resign. What did you learn from that experience, and how did this shape your managing skills?
I'd have to look at my position when I worked for the city of Alabanac there. We had a situation where out in the township, it was a strong township where it was a charter township. They had their own fire, police, basically a full service municipality. But they didn't have utilities to all the different areas, and there was 3 houses on the outskirts of town that was very close to the city, in which the state of Michigan came to the city asking us if we could provide utility service to them. And at that time, the council was more strong where they didn't want to take utilities down to the township. So what I propose is to do an annexation, that we would square off the boundaries of the city, because there was a certain part of the city in that general area that was still in the city but didn't have utility services. And that would allow us to look at possible development in that piece of land in the future, as well as work our way down towards where the 3 houses were at, which needed the utilities, because they were basically being condemned by the state. So I worked with the city engineer to work up with the state boundaries commission the documents necessary, and it just went south. I had a vote of 5-2 to go ahead with the annexation, but when we submitted the paperwork, it didn't go well. The boundaries commission found errors in the descriptions that were provided by the engineer, and that in the meantime, it was over like a 3-month process that this was all going on. The township became uproaried about that, and like to get to the south part of or the northern part of their township, it'd be basically best to drive through the city. They wouldn't do that, and there was just a lot of things going on. So my takeaway from that is that from that standpoint forward, I became a more collaborative type person. I know that there are certain times when people want to live in the township, people want to live in the city, but the two should be able to work together. There are common grounds on both sides that they can work collaboratively and reach those goals or objectives, working with each other and still put things aside that they disagree on. So from that standpoint forward, I learned that I no longer want to approach anything like that unless I have exact buy-off on the township, if that's what they wanted to do. I'm a more collaborative person now.
Any follow-up? Mr. Bachman?
We call on people you've worked with over the past years. What will they tell us about you? And give us a word or a phrase that an employee or a close peer might use that your bosses or elected officials might not use to describe you.
I think any of my references I provided would tell you excellent worker, that I'm dedicated to the job, that I get the job done, and the information being provided is accurate and what they had asked for, and it takes a little involvement from their standpoint for me to provide them with what they want. As far as descriptives of my work ethic or abilities, a go-getter, dedicated, relentless, go out and do whatever the job is, I'm willing to go out there and do it. If it's like, Ed was working on a microphone earlier, I don't think a finance person usually works on a microphone, but he was, so that's something like me. If something's going on and they need help, I'm willing to do that. And I think anyone that you talk to from my background would agree with that, if it's out of my league on what's going on, I'm willing to step in and try to help whatever way I can.
Ms. Beaton?
So when you use the word, I'm going to ask a follow-up question, last question. When you use the word relentless, does that mean you just don't give up until you reach collaboration, or give me a situation where that would work, where you're relentless?
Well, like in the job right now, we're I don't know, it's not hardly anything to do with this, but we work with alcohol and drug testing for the state. There's like 16,000 people that are in a drug and alcohol testing random program that we have to pick every once in a while to get tested, like in correction officers or troopers or if they're in a safety sensitive position. Well, in order to complete a form that they send to the drug lab or the collection site, the supervisor has to fill in the information. And if they don't provide it, then we can't match up that document with the person when we want to find out who's testing. So I'm relentless at telling the drug and alcohol coordinators in every department, make sure you, before that employee leaves, that the supervisor fills in either the driver's license number or their employee ID, and you don't let that person go to the clinic without that information in there. That's just one example of where I'm trying to be relentless, even though I get a lot of feedback saying, oh, we can't go out and work with the supervisors. Sometimes they're on their own, and I say, well, whatever it is, have them read it back to you that they've done that. That way we don't have a bunch of database errors and stuff like that.
Okay. And the question for you now is, when hiring a new department director to join and strengthen your team, what characteristics and/or attributes are you looking for, and why those?
I would look for a person who's a team player and that they know the job that they're being considered for, that they're quite capable to do that. And I like people with a sense of humor. It's always easier in the job when you can have some humor going around, but it's just that they interact well with their coworkers and that they have the experience.
Anybody have any follow-up questions? No? Thank you.
Sullivan.
Are you more of a leader or a manager? And tell us how that describes the kind of administrator you are.
I'm not a micromanager. Like my current boss is a micromanager where she has her hands on everything. I'm more of a person who relies on their department heads to do what they've been assigned to do. They were selected for that position. They should have the abilities to do it. I would be the type of person who would be an open door person where they can come in anytime they want. I would like to have regular staff meetings where I would be kept informed on what's going on throughout the city, what type of projects they're working on, what type of issues they're running into. But I'd leave it up to them. Like I said, I'm not a micromanager, and as long as I'm kept well informed on what's going on and wouldn't encounter any surprises, that's the way I would like to leave it. I wouldn't encroach on their departments, going to ask their direct reports about issues or not. I'd work right through the department heads.
Any follow-up?
I guess the follow-up that's listed here is, what approach you use to get the highest level of performance from your team? How do you draw that out of your employees?
Well, I would think that most employees would naturally would aspirate to the highest level possible.
You'd think.
You would think. If push comes to shove, you can always use an evaluation type approach where you set objectives that they need to accomplish, that it's quantifiable as opposed to subjective, that there's a way to measure what they're accomplishing, and if you find out that things aren't working out, you actually talk to them and say, hey, this is what I thought was going to happen. I thought A was going to happen, but B happened. Can you tell me if something's going on where it's not working out for you? Maybe more training is necessary. Maybe they don't understand the task at hand. But I would definitely work with my employees to understand what's going on and make sure that they have the tools that they need to get the job done. Then at that point, maybe you would go to like an evaluation process if it lingers.
Okay, thank you.
Martin Pontiac.
Can you describe your personal code of values and ethical standards for us? Tell us about a time you were confronted with an ethical challenge and had to reply on those standards as an executive. How did you handle that situation, and what would you do differently now, if anything?
I believe my standards are very high, that I will do everything ethical. I will not do anything that I'm not authorized to do. If something comes up and it's not part of my privy, or if you look at the rules and regulations that run that position or my position, that I would get council approval on before I would do it. I wouldn't go out and sign a contract or give a person a wage change or whatever it is. I would make sure that whatever I'm considering, that's what I have authority to. I would not want to do it without authority, and also that if I'm very keen on having more than one person involved, that, so when you're making decisions like that, that there's at least two people buying off on that, that they know what's going on, and you're not off to yourself, like where you could go out and steal money or something like that. I would make sure all those things are in process where someone can't touch finances by themselves. As far as, could you elaborate on the last part of the question, like where?
How did you handle the situation and what would you do differently now, if anything? Let's see. Tell us about a time you were confronted with an ethical challenge and had to rely on those standards as an executive.
In the city of Elginak, there was a time where there was a shortage of employees. Like, so one of the persons left. I can't remember the exact position, but it was in the treasury department. And what happened is the treasurer asked that they receive a special incentive pay while they were doing extra work, or what they felt they were doing extra work. And I didn't feel comfortable doing that on my own, so that was something that I brought before council, saying, here over a temporary position or a temporary period, we're explaining that it's going to be from X to Z this time period, that they would have like a 50 cent per hour wage increase. And I didn't let the treasurer talk me into just doing it on my own. I went the correct way and presented to city council, and they had to approve that way.
Any follow-up? Mayor Pro Tem. Or I'm sorry, Mr. Kowalski.
What are the touchstones of an ideal organization culture? Those you would find in the best and most effective public service organizations. How do you go about installing that philosophy in a team you would lead? Want me to read it again?
Yeah, please.
Even I was confused. What are the touchstones of an ideal organization culture? Those you would find in the best and most effective public service organizations. How do you go about installing that philosophy in a team that you would lead?
So you want to know about the culture I would install with the team? It's a good question. I'm just the type of person that works with their department heads. That it seems like department heads would already be in a position where they're in a good culture. That if something isn't quite right, then if training is necessary, then maybe look at different aspects of training to get to the culture that you're looking for. I think that's as far as I can go with that.
Any follow-up?
Would words like ethics, honesty, morality, would those be touchstones you might use? And if so, how would you instill those behaviors in your employees?
Well, you lead by example, definitely there. So, you won't find me out in a bar drinking late and driving down the road. Everything I do, I will do ethically. I don't want to have anything more benefits than any other employee, because we're all on the same team working together. That I lead by example, that what they see is what they get, and that they can find respect in that, and that I would respect them as well.
And if an employee wasn't meeting your standards, you would do what then?
It all starts with a one-on-one conversation with them. I know what's going on in their head. They could be having medical issues. They could have issues at home, or they just don't understand what's expected of them.
Okay.
Any other follow-up? Mayor Pro Tem.
So what was happening the last time a resident said, I pay your salary and I expect immediate action? How did you work through the situation and what was the outcome?
I've never had it quite that way, but I can understand where you're coming at. I would talk with them, try to get a great understanding of what their situation is, and then if it's like an argumentative point, I would try to slow down the conversation, because that's usually when things get heated. But if you're able to slow down, repeat what they said, and try to have them elaborate on it, and then things get to calm down, so they're not as mad as they started out with. So you understand the situation and explain to them what you're going to do. You're going to do A, B, and C. You're going to go look at the issue that they described. You're going to see what you can do with it, and then you're going to report back to them and say, this is what we can do. I think that's the most that you can person can do, is try to work with that citizen, tell them that you are concerned, and that you will do what you can with the ability that you have. It might not happen overnight, depending on what it is. Maybe they want to have chickens in the city, who knows? But whatever the issue is, just tell them you'll research it and figure it out and get back with them with a conclusion. And if they don't like that conclusion, see what other alternatives might be available to ease the situation.
Any follow-up? Walk us through a process improvement project you led or tackled. What prompted your review? What were you looking to achieve? What steps did you employ, and what was the outcome?
Process. I'll have to stick with more recent type of work for that. I'm not thinking maybe city government, but another part of our job that I work with is annual leave donations, where employees can donate part of their annual leave to other employees to use for sick leave, because they've used all their sick leave and can no longer do that. Or they've run out of their sick leave, so they're not getting paid anymore. So the state set up a program where people who have extra annual leave can donate it. In order to do this, the departments have to fill out a form that calculates what is being asked for, and I was responsible for developing that form. That it becomes pretty simple, that if they fill in the boxes correctly, that it'll add up correctly, and it'll tell us exactly what we need. So it was, instead of a bunch of paper copies where we'd have to get hand or hard-coded copies or printed copies, that we'd have to do our own calculations, and that we were able to use this new form, that it was an easier step for the departments to submit this, and that it was a lot more accurate when it comes to reviewing and authorization of the donation of the annual leave to the individuals who needed it.
This was a state-sponsored idea, or in what municipality did this happen? It's rather an interesting idea, actually.
What it is I'm not sure who authorized it, but because I was there before I got there, but it may have been part of the collective bargaining agreements or what have you. The department I work for is in charge of those. But what happens when a person's been off sick and like they're off 6 months and they don't have enough either annual leave or sick leave in their banks, that they're gonna have to go without pay because they don't qualify for workers' comp, and they might not get to long-term disability yet. But until that point, we feel that we need to provide them with a step in case, so they're not suffering financially. So the state came up with a program where individuals who have extra annual leave, there's certain times where if you don't use your annual leave, you'll lose it. And also people just feel willing to donate it. So what you can do is go around, these people who need donations can go around to their coworkers and ask for annual leave donations to benefit them, and they can get up to like, I believe it's like 80 hours.
Wow.
Or 140 hours of donations from these other people. So once it gets approved, we'll set it aside for that person who's sick to use as sick time leave. So when they're off, if they're like cancer treatment or heart attack or something very serious, that they're still able to get by and keep their job and still have a financial income that they need to survive.
you find yourself frustrated doing that at all? You ever get frustrated? Do you get frustrated?
Well, everyone gets frustrated. The one time I get frustrated as that is when sometimes people,
What kind of stuff frustrates you? What frustrates you personally?
personally,
Mhm.
I get frustrated when I go in the store and they're not.
Say it again?
I get frustrated when I go to a store and they're not able to assist me on the questions I have. You go into Walmart and ask them to help you with something, and they don't know anything than what other ones described in the box. Or if you need something special, if you're looking outside of the normal box for information, they're not able to help you. So I get a little frustrated for that, but on the job, like I was talking about this annual leave donation, that people ask for it, and one person was asking for, they have to agree to use up all their annual leave, but they submit paperwork and they haven't done that. So I get frustrated when they don't look at the rules and say, you can't bank like a week's worth of annual leave and still accept donations from other people. So I get frustrated when they don't understand the program. But it's just a matter of explaining it to them, and they usually come around.
Any other follow-up? Mr. Bachman?
From what you've learned about us and our community, what do you think our priorities should be for the next 3 years, and how would you tackle them?
I think you have a good strategy plan all laid out. You have your capital improvement plan that goes into 2017. You have your traffic improvement plan that goes out quite a ways. And I'm surprised that you're so well developed your capital improvement plan. Then you have your different strategies within your budget you've done. You look at your blight. You look at economic development. Homeless people, I think I noticed a homeless person earlier today, so I can see where that could be an issue. So it'd be a matter of following those guidelines that you've set up and working towards accomplishing that. Like for economic development, you've got an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce. They've got the DDA as well as economic development officer there. I would work with that person for your economic development strategy. It'd be important to make sure that you not only keep current manufacturers like Morgue Salt or the prison who uses up 30% of your water, that you make sure you work with them as well as develop new ones, not only in manufacturing but service industry as well as trades, that you can are ready communities. So to me that tells me that you've already worked through things and that you're all set to go right out the gate to help people. So you work with Rising Tide, see what they have to offer, work with MEDC, work with MISHTA for housing, you can work with Leo. There's a lot of places out there that you can work with to at least get the economic development part of your plan rolling and working for you in the future. Like one thing you're looking at housing, one of the things your blight or housing, the person I carpool with is in charge of the lead abatement program, where he works closely with doing that in regards to not for water but for paint in houses, and he works with setting up contractors come out and look at people who have houses that were built before 1978, because usually that's a time period when lead was taken out of paint. So houses built before then, chances are they have a lot of lead in them. There's a state program set up that where they can go around to these houses and help give grant money and have people come out and look at their lead so that their children aren't eating it, and that it's a more safe environment for them to live in. That's the type of program that I work with. Go right along with your blight program for housing.
Okay.
Any other follow-up? Ms. Beaton?
I'm assuming you reviewed our budget. What did you see? And what are you bringing to the table that will help us maintain our financial stability?
I see a big increase this year for the wet weather collection site at the wastewater treatment plant, so it was a jump of like $10 million from previous years, but you have like a $7 million general fund. Of that, probably like 80% of that plus is personnel. So there isn't a lot of change. I noticed you didn't get a blight officer, that you decided that you wanted to go stick with the police officers in their districts, looking at blight and looking for situations like that. So there's not a lot that you can do with that, personalized, and also that your OPEB costs were changing because MERS increased the cost that you had to contribute to them substantially because they've downgraded it and want you to grow it faster. And even though, to me, it looked like you were doing a good job, for some reason they did a lower outlook that it's not as good as it could be, but eventually it'll get paid off in like 2036, and then you should basically have a windfall because it'll be all taken care of. I'm not sure if all your employees, it appears your employees have, new employees have converted to defined contributions, so that's always good. So that'll keep your costs down. I'm not sure if you're still doing.
We're still doing defined benefit in the,
for new employees though?
with the union employees. For any new hires and non-union people, it's defined contribution.
That's a very good step. The state converted to that back in 1997 of all times. And I'm not sure if Governor Engler had the foresight back then, but someone did. I think it helped out the state and it should help out cities. But you have to make sure that you're able to afford those things and keep those costs down. And look at keeping your fund balance. It looks like you have like a 20% fund balance, which is pretty good. I would say that's above average for most municipalities. And that you've said to reduce the amount of money you're using for your gas and oil fund, so that's a good point looking for the future. I think there's a lot, to me it looks like you're proceeding correctly, that with the exception of maybe the cost for the police department, I think some of those went up because of some arbitrations from Act 312 that didn't go in your favor. Try to work through those, and I'm not sure if your command officers or patrol officers, their contract expired end of June. I'm not sure if that's been completed yet. So there might be cost there, and then you have your firefighters coming up pretty soon, as well as your steelworkers contract. I think it's the year after that. So try to keep those in check and give them what they deserve, but also look out for the city to make sure it's within reason.
I like the way you worded that, give them what they deserve. Thank you. I don't have any more questions.
I think you kind of already touched on this, but what experiences have you had in securing and administering alternative project funding, and what would you want to bring to Manistee?
In city government, I've done Michigan grants as well as coastal zone grants and fund equity grants. We had in Harbor Beach, we built a wastewater treatment plant. It was a $4.5 million project where it was replaced the current one. The big employer there was, or not employer, but big business there was GE Zero, made this NutraSuite, and they went in on the construction of the wastewater treatment plant because they're going to use 60% of the capacity of that. So we were able to, so the city is responsible for 40% of that. We were able to go out and get EPA funding to manage that. I was responsible. The city engineer was the main person in charge of that, but I would assist in making sure that documents were provided to that needed to be submitted as the funds were administered. So I think those type of grants would be something I could still look into. I'm not sure if coastal zone grants are available, but I'm sure there's DNR type grants that are equivalent to that still out there. In Harbor Beach, we also used DNR funds to help us fund a marina that was being constructed while I was there. So there's other types of funds that are available. It came out with a lot of state money, but it ended up being a municipal on a marina. But I think Micho would be a good stepping point for housing that There should still be money available to go out and see what Mission has to offer. I know in the downtown area that there was one study where it says you need like 94 new houses and 300 rental units that someone suggested is needed for the city. Maybe the businesses on River Street can, I'm not sure how well their second stories are, but it seems like it would be a perfect place for lofts, provided that's available. And the city I came from, or live in now, or I live outside the city, but the city I live in now, Wausau, I see a lot of changes where the building owners are converting upstairs to lofts, and it seems like I'm reading it all the time in the newspaper where they're getting money sources from a lot of different areas, and I would research that to see what's available and see if the building owners would be interested in going that route, as well as council would be okay with having mixed zoning in that, where there's both residential and commercial in that area.
Any follow-up?
I'm just curious about if you had to pick a number out of your head as to how many grant applications you've gone after and how many you've achieved and how many you didn't achieve. Your loss, win factor on the grants.
I think I've only done 6, and again, it was back when I was in the city government, and we received like 3 of those, so halfway.
Okay. Thanks. That's it.
Over the past several years, we have approved a recreational plan and a master plan that sets forth several potential priorities. Getting agreement around implementing goals and strategies will be important. Walk us through a time when you faced challenges building around a set of city council and community goals. What strategies did you use to get to the best possible solution?
Before you do any budgeting, I like to sit down with council and find out what their goals and objectives are for the budget process. So a few months out before you get into the nitty-gritty of developing the budget, we would look at what's been done historically, show them where they're at, and what the projections are for the new year, and then just have like a work session where you shoot ideas back and forth on what type of changes they want. If more recreation is what is in store for that year, then say here, like I said earlier, that 80% of your general fund is probably payroll, so there isn't a whole lot you can do to that. So you're working with 15-20% of the budget, unless you go out and get other funding sources and say, these are the one-off items we've done before. I anticipate we'll be able to free up this type of money, and I would like to find out what objectives you have and what type of dollar you'd like to set aside for I would go out and put a dollar amount that would cost for those items, and then we'd sit down and figure out what priorities we want to go forward with of those listing.
Any follow-up? Mr. Kabowski?
Okay, the continued success and stability of our River Street Business District is very important to our residents. What concepts do you bring with you to further collaboration with our independent businesses to target ongoing success?
Well, I think part of my talk, when I go around talking to business, I'd like to say, hey, what's going on, what's good, what's bad, what would you like the city to do on your behalf? When I walked through there, it looked pretty vibrant. I tried to go to TJ's, but it was like a 45-minute wait, so I went down to Fillmore instead. I thought it was pretty cool that you're walking down the street and there's bowls there for dogs to have water, and you even had like a public bathroom right down there. I've never seen that in a city. In the cities down where I live, they wouldn't consider that. Maybe more a tourism area, but I thought that was pretty cool. I definitely would talk with the businesses, find out what their needs is. Chamber of Commerce should have a good beat on it, as well as the DDA. And there might be individual issues that the owners of the buildings or the businesses that they're not seeing addressed by the DDA or the chamber, that maybe they have some ideas that the city could help them out some way. But having that as your spotlight, to me, that's perfect. That's like, to me, if you, I don't know if you guys watch Hallmark movies, but that seemed like that would be a perfect place to shoot a Hallmark movie. going down River Street. I don't know why they film all their movies in Vancouver, but it seemed like that would be a perfect place to do it because it draws in the tourists and it's just a very relaxed, nice place to be.
Follow? Mayor Pro Tem?
It's right up your alley.
Okay.
Tell us about your experience with public unions and explain how you approach labor negotiations. What can an administrator do or assure that a solid working relationship is the outcome of a settled contract?
To me, it's looking at what other municipalities do. When I worked for we don't do this approach in the state too closely, but in city government, you go out and get your comparables with the different municipalities of the same, basically geographical area, size, SEV, those sorts of things, and population, and get to know what they're giving. Of recent years, the state has been putting clamps on what cities can offer to employees, so you have to keep that in consideration. But be straightforward with the union stewards, so not only during the bargaining process, but as well as leading up to that. I'm not sure if you have a lot of grievances filed, but hopefully there aren't, and that you have your good working relationship with the union people, and then keep informed with the union steward as well as the union representative that assists the local unit, and say, here's what I found comparable wise, and this is what we're willing to offer, and see if they can buy in. I've never had, in the local government level, I never had any problems. They're all pretty much in line with agreement that what was being presented was reasonable. And back then there was a little bit more flexibility in funding, so it might be a little more challenging these days, but just being straightforward with them. In state government, we have 10 different units that we negotiate. That includes 36,000 employees, and we're actually in the bargaining process this year. We have 7 units that are up for contract. Troopers are behind in a couple years, and my boss is working on that contract by herself. But we're about to enter bargaining with those units. I'll probably be working with the SEIUs. They have 3 different units, probably helping them out. But sitting at the bargaining table, we look at the contract. We agree on what currently, it's more sophisticated, to me it's more detailed because we go article by article, and that's not what I experienced at the city level. That we say we're going to stay with current language, and we can sign off on each agreement, and then when we get to the few parts that are tougher to deal with, we pass information back and forth and try to negotiate it and see what we can come up with, and eventually come to a settlement that both sides can live with. It might not be the best for both sides, but sometimes you have to walk away happy and sad at the same time.
Have you had any experience with arbitration? Union arbitrators?
312 arbitration I have. When I worked for the city of Algonac, the police officers union, they were given the authority to go out and invest their own defined contribution money, and that's what they were using for. They didn't have a pension or a defined. They didn't have a defined benefit, but they had defined contribution, and they went out and they had the brother-in-law of the steward invest the money for them, and it didn't turn out too well. So they took us into grievance, and they went to a binding arbitrator down in Southfield, and he ended up telling the city or the Algonac that we had to refund the pension for them and make them whole for whatever they lost over those years. And wasn't happy about that.
You follow up? This is a good one. I like this question. City managers can sometimes find themselves in a tug of war between departments with competing resources, needs, residents, or neighborhoods with rival desires. city council members with varying priorities or policy positions? What is your go-to strategy in dealing with conflict or different viewpoints?
Well, it's important to understand where everyone's coming from. So it's sort of like the situation we talked about earlier, that where I want to know what's going on for each of the sources, what their needs are, what they would like to accomplish, and then actually have them give me a number on how high of a priority is it from like a scale of 1 to 10, how important it is to do that, and then let them know that there are other priorities that could come into play that also have to be evaluated. So you try to lessen the conflict, but I think most people would realize that money can only go so far, that there's only so much in the kitty that's available to spend, and that it could be something that maybe you can say, yeah, we agree that that's a very important issue, but can we maybe push that aside for maybe the next 2 or 3 years and return to that issue and see if we can work with it at that point. But it's important to understand where everyone's coming from. So maybe they have ideas out there that you haven't thought of, and that they could rise to the top and understand what they want, and just go from there. And you have your whole bucket list of things that are questionable, and just end up whittling through it till you come to the final few that can make the grade and be financed and approved and worked on.
Any follow-up? Mr. Bachman?
Tell me a story about an employee you worked with who you are most proud of. What happened to get them? How did you get them there? So tell me a story about an employee you worked with whom you are most proud of, and what happened to get him or her to that point. Let me follow that up then a little bit. Have you ever mentored an employee? You personally mentored an employee of yours?
Not directly, other than, well, when you're in charge of the employees, the department heads would actually work with the employees when I worked in city government, but and
Mentoring directly is not something that you've been involved with?
unofficially, I have. Like, when I worked for child support, there was a person who needed to provide information on data, and what they were doing is they weren't keying in the data correctly. So to me, I work with them. I try to sit down and explain that when you're keying this information, we're going to be using it for this project, and that if you're not keying in correctly, that it's going to cause issues. And what I did is sit down with her and try to figure out what's going on, and if there was something blocking her from keying the data in correctly that was causing the problems down the road, where we were able to use it and properly without going back and doing a lot of rework on the project. But that was sort of a mentoring process where I tried to work with her and understand where she's coming in, and made some adjustments on her end to make sure that the keying was done correctly and that she had the skill set to do that.
Do you have a plan where you work in your personally that involves succession planning, where you might assume that someday you're going to leave and train people to replace you, or replace strategic positions within the organization? Do you have that, or do you work with that?
What we do where I work now, we have instruction guides that
You have what? I didn't hear you.
instruction guides that every job that we do, there's an instruction guide for it. I'm responsible for like 15 or 20 different instruction guides that someone could read through that instruction guide and do whatever I do.
That's part of a policy decision someplace in the organization, correct?
Could you repeat that?
That whole succession plan is part of a policy decision, not you personally, but it's built in the organization, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we started that about 8 years ago. Before that, there wasn't anything. You would just have to ask a bunch of different people on how they did this job. But now, my boss thought it was important to have instruction manuals so that if someone leaves, that someone can pick up right away by just looking through that. It's a very detailed process that, as long as we review those on a regular basis, and as long as you have that document, you can pick up anyone else's job and basically do it.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bach, Ms. Beaton?
Oh, I have a follow-on if I can.
Okay, sure.
So in your career, has there been anyone that was your boss or directly involved who was influential in your career choices? And if so, how did they influence you?
Career choices?
Hmm?
Give me a second to get. Well, as far as my career choices, this I don't know how this is going to sound, but when I was a kid, my parents owned a business, and right next door was another business, and the city allowed this business to open up, and they allowed them to side skip some of the zoning requirements. So these people at the business was a restaurant, my parents owned a laundromat, and they didn't require this business to have parking that was supposed to be for that area. So at that point, my father went to the city council and couldn't get anything done. But at that point, I got the idea that I would want to work in city government to try to be fair to everyone, that everyone is treated equally. So I think that directed my career path as long as I went along. That when I went to school, I think I got more direction from professors as opposed to supervisors along the way. So I would say those are the individuals who influenced me on which direction to go. There was a point where I thought I might run for political office, but then it just didn't seem right for me. That I'd rather be in a more administrative type role, because I think it would last a lot longer and it would be more beneficial for me.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
What are the most effective tools you have found to recruit and retain talent? Give us specific examples of how you've used them.
A lot of people are running after money, so trying to retain talent, hopefully people value their job, that you create an environment where they feel good about it, that they come to appreciate their job, that they go home with a smile on their face and a pat on their back that they've done a good job. So I would definitely work at being a team builder, have events for the employees that do special items for the employees when they I forget what the term is, but pat on the back. I can't remember what the other fancy term is. Gotcha or whatever. Attaboy is what I'm saying. So try to reward them when you can. Recognize the hard work that they've done, and let them know that they're a valued part of the team. And hopefully, if you can't compensate them with wages, that they'll come away every day knowing that they've done a good job, that they're happy with their work, and they want to stay where they're at.
In your current job, do you supervise other people?
No, I do not.
You don't. And in your current job, are you responsible for hiring and firing other people?
I'm not.
When's the last job you had where you were responsible for supervising individuals or hiring or firing individuals? How far back was that?
It would have been in early 2000s.
What job was that?
A couple jobs. I worked mission school for the deaf and blind. I was a business manager there. I had people report to me that I was responsible for. And when I worked for policy studies, I had staff people that worked for me there.
Can you think of the best employee that ever worked for you personally?
I would say the School for Deaf and Blind Kathy was a very good worker. She knew everything inside and out. She was the financial person that took care of purchasing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and just general financial operation of the school there. And I felt a world of her and her abilities to do stuff.
Thank you.
Any other follow-up?
Me, sorry. Techniques have you used to keep the community and participating partners informed in their local government, and what would you recommend for Manistee?
Well, I would do a newsletter, start with a newsletter. I believe you guys do a newsletter right now. And be available to talk with anyone. I always have an open door that they don't need anything special to come in and talk to me, that I would reach out, be involved with Rotary Lions, like if they would like someone to come talk with them, if they have certain issues they want to talk about, be available to talk to those groups. I'm a church-going person, so the church that I would become a member of, I would be available to talk with parishioners there, as well as if there's other church members or other churches that would like people to talk to, or hear me talk, or whatever. Just be out on the street. Don't be closed up and walking with blinders on. Walk down the street with a smile on your face, shaking hands, say, hey, anything going on? What's going on? Hi, how are you today? Walk in businesses randomly, explain who you are, and just be as open as inviting as you can. There's been times where I've actually done articles in the local newspaper on a regular basis, submitted articles that was information on in the city as opposed to just a newsletter. So just keep everyone informed. In the past, I've done surveys sent out surveys with either like the water bill or taxes or even on their own to figure out what people are looking for, and I would collect that information and maybe use that as a basis to see where we want to go with the budget and what type of priorities we want. Collect that information. It wasn't done professionally with an organization that does it. I've done those on my own and did the tallies on the data and try to understand where people are at. Stuff like that.
I have a follow-up. What steps can you take to be certain council is hearing from the most representative group of citizens rather than the loudest?
Communication to council is very utmost. I would keep you all informed on everything that's going on. I don't want you to be sitting in a coffee shop one day and someone come up to you and you'd be blindsided by an issue that you weren't aware with. I would like to make sure that you are 100% on board with everything that's going on, that if there comes to a time when that isn't happening, that you come with me and I'll research the item that's going on that you've been approached by. But definitely keep a straight line of communications open to everyone here. That with these days, email is a lot easier to use than it was back in 15, 20 years ago, or whatever. That's a lot easier to communicate with people these days. So I don't see there would ever be an issue on communications, that you would know what's going on a daily basis.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I do. Talking about communication and more broadly, as a city manager, would you be comfortable calling the local television stations or radio, or getting involved with letting the newspapers know what's going on? Would you establish a Facebook page? Would you use Instagram or Twitter to get messages out? Communication is really all about social media and how you manage it. So do you use any of those tools?
Just on a personal standpoint, I use Facebook, but I have a Twitter account. I really haven't used Instagram, but I think those are all very important communication tools that can be used. Calling up media, if you have a hot news item or you do a press release, send it out to them. If you want to do an interview, find out which radio stations are in the area. If they want to come out and interview you for a topic, or a reporter wants to come out, be open to that. But definitely communicate with social media, because I think it's important. I know you get your critics out there, but you just have to weed through the critics and put your best foot forward and communicate as well as possible the information that you want to make available so people understand what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Have you had any situations where you had to deal with cruel and unusual critics?
No, that I can't say that I have. I know they're out there. And I first thought I would try to approach logic, talking with them to try to understand where they're coming from, but sometimes that isn't possible. So at that point, I would probably have to do some research on the best way to approach a critic. That if it's an ongoing person who's always criticizing, that try to come to an understanding that maybe if it's a public person, you can maybe sit down and talk to them, figure out what's going on with them and why you're being approached that way, and explain to the best that you can the situation and understand where they're coming from and come to some type of baseline as to what's going on, and hopefully both will walk away that the criticism is cut down. But I would get other people, the department involved with me on that, because they have a history of what's going on and understanding and best approach on how to deal with stuff like that.
Thank you. Martin Pontiac.
What is the most important skill a manager can have when it comes to council-manager relationships? Can you tell us about a time when you had to rely on that skill to build on relationships?
I believe the most important part is to make sure that everyone's on the same page every day, that council knows exactly what you're doing, that they're never blindsided, that you're having authorization to do whatever it is you're dealing with, and just to work closely, that they're well informed. Your city manager report is a very important tool, as well as daily communications if that's necessary, as items warranted. But the city manager should be taking direction from council that they set up the goals while the city manager administers those goals, that the administrator should have freedom to work within the set priority or the set authorization that person has to carry out what's been authorized by the council. And then if there comes times where it appears that the person has overstepped, and sit back and talk with council and figure out where they think that things went astray and try to straighten it out.
Any follow-up? Mr. Kowalski.
Okay, we are coming up on your third year evaluation. As you are looking back at our progress, what will we have accomplished together that would define success for you and for our residents?
Well, I would think you'd have a lot more of your strategic plan objectives, goals and objectives, that they would be completed and on your way, that you'd still be financially sound with at least the 20% fund balance, as well as other fund balances and the other funding sources outside of the general fund, that people will say, hey, I've talked to the manager, he's a good guy, that he's very approachable and understandable of my concerns, and that he's willing to work with me, and that employees will come up to you and say, if I was doing an evaluation on the city manager, that he or she would get good ratings. Get input from the department heads saying, I agree or disagree on what's going on with the city manager, whether that person is doing a good job or not. That those would be it.
Any follow-up?
Do you have any experience working with volunteers, volunteer groups? In your current capacity or anywhere in the last 10, 15 years?
We've had, in city government, we've had people who were paid by others, and they're basically volunteers to do work around the city.
And what was your relationship with that group? How did you work with them, or where'd you fit in?
Well, they were like, I don't know if you've been around long enough for a program called Green Thumb, but it's a group where they would fund people to out to different businesses. They'd provide the funding for them, and they'd basically work for the different cities at different jobs. But most of those would be working for DPW type jobs, so I didn't have direct responsibility for them. In my current job, part of this basically United Way, we work with department heads that are volunteers to go out and try to get funding from their departments, and I work with those individuals to make sure they have what they need to go out and reach the employees within their departments to try to see if they'd be willing to do payroll deductions for different charity units. We have like 1,000 different charities that they can contribute to, and they would go out and promote that donation program that comes up in the fall.
Okay.
Anything else? Mayor Pro Tem. Your turn.
Fit between community and manager goes both ways. What attributes must a community or organization have before you're willing to go to work there?
I think a lot of the attributes that I see here are what I would strive to have at a job. That everything seems to be running really smoothly. That council, sometimes it appears that there's disagreements on certain issues, but for the most part, they come together and are aligned with issues that are going on. They know when things are important. Like, we recently had some amendments to the zoning that looked like that was really good actions that were appropriate to take. But there's still times where you might disagree on, like, housing. When they're developed in Hampton, it looked like at the start that there were certain issues that needed to be worked through and understood, but eventually those were addressed. So it'd be important to me that the council works closely with each other, and then, like I said, that there could be times where they disagree, but I would try to make sure that when an issue is being discussed, that I'm providing information to the council, that everything that they need beforehand, that they have access to that, that when it comes to the council meeting, that hopefully there won't be any stones unturned, that the information I presented them answers all their questions that they have, and hopefully it'll go smoothly, even though they may agree or disagree, that at least there won't be information that needs to still be researched. But like I say, you have a very good community here. Things are run really well, and to me it would be ideal. I once worked in a city where there was a husband and wife on the council, and the wife was a former city treasurer, and I think I would try to avoid a situation like that in the future.
Follow up?
I have a quick question. You seem like a really nice, quiet guy. Are you able to, like, if you have somebody that's, just not doing their job and, able to fire somebody if need be, or,
Oh, well, most definitely.
Okay.
I may be soft-spoken, but I have a very high passion for my job. So you may think I might not be able to go out and communicate with people, but I can. I get passionate about things, but I may be presented in a soft-spoken way, but I will do that. And as far as evaluating people, I think it's important to look at them to understand their situation and to see if you can work with them first. But if push comes to shove and it's just not working out, it's time to let go. There are a few people that I work with at the state, and I understand why they wouldn't do the same type of situation where you can just tell that they weren't interested in the job, but they wouldn't go through the steps necessary to evaluate them, to do progressive disciplinary plans, and then eventually, if it comes to the end where if they aren't able to improve that, you just have to let them out the door.
Okay.
Any other follow-up? There are different ways of staying organized. How do you stay organized?
I keep a list of all the things that I want to accomplish. Sometimes there's times where I've used a lot of yellow stickies and stuff, but I like to keep a lot of activities and keep tasks on where we're at with each one, grading those and knowing when the deadline is for those items and making sure that I'm on top of those before the deadline approaches.
What are your two strengths? What do you figure your two strongest points as a person are?
That I don't give up on a item, that I'll go out there and do it to the best of my ability, and that I guess my finance background is what I was born and bred to do in college, and the vast majority of my jobs have been finance related, so I would say those are my two strengths.
Okay, it's your turn. Do you have any closing statements you'd like to give for us?
Like I said throughout the interview, that I'm very impressed with what you have going here, that everything I've seen is great. Department heads and staff have done an excellent job of doing it. Council has given good directions for them to follow so they can know what they're doing. And I would be a person who can, from day one, step in where Thad was at and pick up where he left off and keep on carrying the ball for several years to go on, and that you will eventually be in a better position 5 years from now, that there may be a few little tweaks that need to be adjusted along the way, but nothing major would change, and I'd work for you on the goals, your economic development, your housing, making sure you have good relationships. I know prisons, you never know when prisons are going to close. I'd make sure that there's good line of communications with the state of Michigan for that, as well as your major manufacturers. I know you're doing your work for housing, that you might be having a development down here, Water Street for some units, and that you have a bunch of property out on the south side that could develop if these actually 94 houses are necessary, that maybe that site can be revisited and see if you can get the ball rolling and having the developer go finish that out to bring on those new houses. But everything I've seen is good. I'm not sure how close you guys are with your Coast Guard, but I know they're always looking to be interacted with. When I was in Harbor Beach, they were threatening to close the Coast Guard station there, and they said the squeaky wheel gets a grease, so we flew out to Washington, talked to our congressman, presented at a hearing, and they were able to save the Coast Guard from closing there. So I know it's important to work with them, know they're appreciated. Stuff like that. I would do whatever it takes to get the job done, and I can guarantee you that you won't find anyone who will work harder. I may be soft-spoken, but behind the scenes I'll be working like a dog trying to get things done.
Do you have any questions for us?
No, I think everything is fine. I understand your time frame. That you need some time to think, muddle through the people you've talked to, but and you'll come to a decision a few days down the road. But I'm good to go.
We do appreciate you. On behalf of the City Council and the City of Manistee, we thank you for taking time to interview. Mr. Anderson will let you know of our decision in the future.
Okay.
And again, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Good luck to you all.
Thank you.
With that, we'll take a 5-minute break.
There'd be any follow-up questions?
This would have been 5 minutes. Felt good?
You get a bigger gavel.
Thank you.
And then I hit recording it, so hopefully that's what we have to.
Mr. Miller.
Good evening.
welcome. Tonight, we have several questions. We're allotting about 60 minutes for the interview. Each of us will ask a series of questions. And at the end, we'll provide you time to talk and ask us questions. First question. So you undoubtedly have done significant research about our community and our organizations. Why do you want to be city manager, to be the next city manager? And what unique background, skills, and experience do you possess that will make you successful here? Sorry.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And just want to start with a thank you to all of you for considering my qualifications this evening. I'm very honored to be selected and to have an opportunity to talk to you tonight. For the next city manager, it is of my interest to continue to work to make this community a better place to live, work, and play, and to make contributions towards that. I feel that it's a very wonderful community to be in, and perhaps in considering my qualifications, if I can help the City Council make an informed decision on the next city manager, it's my honor, and I'll consider that a success. Beyond that, I think that my experience as a state agency director will bode well for bringing that level of experience to the city manager job, and be able to advance the vision and the objectives that City Council has for this community, economic development, code enforcement, etc. Be able to utilize my experience and bring those things for the betterment of the community. I know that I'd like to start out with a little bit of an explanation. I completely understand that I do not have city management experience, but I'd like to take a moment to explain what a state agency director does and how that can translate into city management. When I became the director of Illinois Department of Natural Resources and held that position for 6 years, it was a very tumultuous time. And I, out of necessity, needed to be a hands-on manager of that agency. We managed, at that time, 1,100 employees. I grew the agency to 1,300 employees, and we had a budget of $260 million. The tumultuous time is because we took over from an impeached governor, and there were a number of challenges there with mismanaged funds, where there were challenges with not having a normal transition and not knowing who you could trust in your management team. We had some issues with resources and budgets being slashed and cut, not having the resources and capacity to carry out our duties. And I had to jump in and be a hands-on manager in those capacities. Some of the responsibilities of that agency translate to city government in law enforcement, engineering, parks and recreation, infrastructure needs involving sewage treatment plants, code enforcement type duties along the lines of managing regulatory pieces for coal, oil, gas, and water. All of those translate into many of the functions that you have at a city government. In fact, when you look at the state parks in and of themselves, they're a bit like city government with the kind of infrastructure needs that you might have. We tackled those problems. We're able to turn it around and do a number of successful things, which I can illustrate later. But I do want to assure you that my experiences in state government and the kind of leadership that I presented and worked on behalf of the governor and on behalf of the state agency will translate and can translate to being a successful city manager.
Any follow-up?
Yeah, it's not just being able to interact with the people that work under you, it's also being able to interact with the citizens and city council. So it's a little bit more, I respect the fact that you had so many people under you, obviously, but it's more than that. It's 360 degrees. from any place you stand, that is your target. And you have to always keep that in mind. So I'm looking for that from you somehow tonight. So that's the end of my comments.
I appreciate that direction. And I think that is good direction. So when you are working with, in that capacity, you do have a number of constituencies that you work with and address and help shape policy. You also are reporting to a chief executive officer or governor who is able to, who is responding to community needs, statewide needs, and you're responsive to that. But you also have a legislative oversight of multiple senators and state representatives that are asking you for oversight, for contact. And so you develop a good communication skill set to work across those different constituencies and authorities. And that's something I hope I can, maybe with a couple examples, demonstrate that I have the ability to do.
Thank you.
You used the phrase hands-on. You had to get down in the weeds, basically, and do hands-on. Give me an example of what that means.
So when we first started, the budget had been slashed by 50% and staffing 50% over the previous decade. We needed to get in immediately and start looking at prioritizing where we could work on delivering services with the limited staff that we had, and start to build the case for more staffing, more resources, and dive into those budget numbers. So that was one of my first jobs, trying to get ready for the next budget cycle, which started immediately, and dove into those numbers with the executive committee, so much like department heads, working with them on what their prioritization was for projects and where their red flags were. So we dove into that immediately with the group that we had and started to work through the budget. Another element that we needed to address was the mismanagement of state and federal funds. We had an issue with funds being swept that were illegally swept. We needed to put those back and start to address some of the audit findings that were levied against us in federal audits. So we started to work immediately on addressing some of those systematic problems so that we can demonstrate to the legislative body that there was indeed some responsible management there, and it would justify additional resources.
Anybody else? From your resume, it appears you have a career filled with accomplishments. Tell us about two of which you are most proud.
So the top accomplishment that I'm most proud of is a 2-year-long effort to raise the fees for the Illinois DNR to put itself back on good footing for state parks and for other usage. That 2-year strategy involved dozens of constituent groups that we negotiated with and asked for their assistance and help, and involved building a case publicly for a stronger department. And we went out and did that, putting together a full communication strategy, utilizing town halls, media releases, and editorial board meetings. We also worked with all of the legislators that we could to make the case for why we needed more law enforcement, why we needed more resources for parks, why we needed more infrastructure to address our deferred maintenance. We made the case there, and it took us 2 years and 2 tries to pass a negotiated legislative package that had fees approved by all the constituent groups that worked forward were going to be impacted, and move that forward. That's one of the largest heavy lifts. It was very difficult to do in that particular climate with an aversion to increasing fees. But that was something that I worked on and was very proud of. The second one is going to be getting a urban park in Saginaw, Michigan, relying on my time at Michigan DNR. It was a heavy lift to pull together General Motors Racer Trust coming out of their bankruptcy, buying their property, working through brownfield issues, working with the county government to create a county park that the state agency would purchase. That was another 2-year-long effort that was recently had a ribbon cutting, providing services to Saginaw and allowing for access for nature and for outdoor recreation inside the city of Saginaw. And so that was a heavy lift. Taught me a great deal about brownfield redevelopment and really utilized a lot of my negotiating skills. So that's another second one. Before I leave with that second example, I want to just also point out, I've mentioned a couple of these examples so far in raising fees or raising taxes. It's not always appropriate, and I want to point that out. So if anyone thinks that that's my go-to for solutions, it was one that fit the times and fit the constituency groups and fit where we needed to go. So certainly will not be using that or utilizing that example much more because we want to make sure that it's understood that there are other tools in the toolbox.
Any follow-up? If offered the position, what will your first 3 months look like in Manistee?
My first response, sir?
Your first 3 months.
3 months.
Yep.
So I think there are 3 things that we need to do, certainly a number of priorities. I think job number 1 is to earn the trust and credibility of City Council, department heads, and staff. Number 2 would be to look ahead at the bargaining unit negotiations. It appears that that's something that's immediately on the table. And then also sit down with the department heads and learn what their perspectives are on their positions, to have a better understanding from their perspective and get to know their work. I think those are some of the objectives for the first 3 months. I'll add a 4th one in, and that is to address some of the outstanding issues with blight or with opportunities for economic development. I think that there is some moves or some look at what's going on downtown. That could be something that we're going to focus on in the first 3 months as a city manager.
Any follow-up questions? Tell us about a poor professional decision you made or about a time you may have failed as a leader. This could include a time when you were fired or asked to resign. What did you learn from that experience, and how did this shape you as a manager?
That's a very good question. I have been removed from office a couple of times, but that's a result of a gubernatorial transition. So I've had 2 different governors let me go as they come in. And I think that the lessons that I've learned, actually upon reflecting upon that experience and being on that roller coaster of going through that every 4 years, that led me to reflect upon the opportunity for a career change. That is what had induced me to look out for other opportunities and to think about an opportunity here in Manistee. So I think that upon that action, and doing some reflection on what that means to continue to do that career um, gave me an opportunity to think about what is important to me and what I can do to continue to make contributions, either to a community or to a particular cause. And that is why I ended up here. I'll leave it at that.
Any follow-up questions?
Yeah, so you've been around. What actually led you here to the city of Manistee? Why are you here?
So after working for the Snyder administration as a deputy director for Michigan DNR, I was given the notice that my term would end on Inauguration Day. So I took that opportunity to reflect upon what I would do. In the meantime, the incoming DNR director and I discussed maybe coming back. It took me about 3 months of exploration, and I think it was not going to be possible for me to return to Michigan DNR. In that time, I started looking for other work and exploring what I might want to do. You know, it was about the May, June timeframe that this opportunity came up, and I thought, from my previous experience of coming here for either vacations or for meetings, that this was a wonderful place to explore and set down roots. And so contemplated that move and applied for that position, and felt that my work at Michigan DNR on economic development, on outdoor recreation industry would lend itself towards a career here, thinking about economic development and how to make an impact in an area that's very tourism driven and based. And so I think reflecting on what our values are and where our point is in our lives, my wife and I, we felt like this would be a great quality of life move for us and a good opportunity for me to branch out and explore new options and a new beginning. Because both of us had been on the up and down roller coaster of being fired every 4 years, that it was time for us to explore something new. Now, in coming here, we've found a really great community. We found some fantastic things to do, and it's my hope that I'll be able to continue to be here and make contributions. So, irregardless of what decision you might make in the coming days, my hope is to continue to stay here and to make contributions and to make this a better place. And it certainly will enjoy being here for a few more years, I hope.
Any other follow-up? Mr. Bachman?
When we call the people you've worked with over the years, what will they tell us about you? Tell us a word or a phrase that an employee or a peer might use to describe you, and maybe an elected official, the governor, might not use to describe you.
I would think that open or inclusive would be words that would describe how an employee would describe me. And if I can go a step further with the elected officials, that either the words credible or trustworthy would come across. So those would be what I would hope that some of the elected officials that I've dealt with in the past would view how I've dealt with them, and what how I've approached their issues and my responses to their inquiries. And hopefully they would feel that way.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mark, you're talking about the people you worked for. What about the people you worked with? What would they say about you?
I would answer again, open and inclusive, that I'm someone who listens to them, and also cares about the mission or is passionate about the mission. So for people who have worked with me, they will know that that I like or enjoy working for a cause or working for a mission or an objective, and they will see that and note that passion and note that I'm usually very open and honest about achieving those goals.
Any other follow-up? Ms. Beaton?
Mark, when hiring a new department director to join and strengthen your team, what characteristics and attributes are you looking for and why these?
I think that having good communication skills and having if you can denote this, a good solid track record of accomplishments would be two of the top things that I would like to see from department head. Beyond that, the technical expertise in the area, some kind of demonstration of that expertise would be something that I would look for. So I think those would be the three items that would be at the top of the list.
You currently have employees that you supervise?
No, sir, not at the chamber.
When was the last, how long has it been since you've had people you supervised or when you had the ability to hire and fire people when you had that set?
So at the Michigan DNR, I had indirect reports as a project leader on a number of different projects. And so it was a very fluid situation to work with different people in that way. There was a period of 2 months where I was the acting forestry chief, and that was a little bit more of a direct report situation, but did not do any hiring or firing there. So the last time that I had hiring and firing capabilities or to provide that sort of direction was as the director of Illinois DNR as late as 2015.
And you typically would hire director level employees rather than entry level employees, or did you have all levels?
No, and at that time there were 25 double exempt or at-will employees at the agency.
Okay.
And that would be the direct span of control. 90% of the agency was unionized and had to follow hiring practices and policies and procedures.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Just kind of a follow-up on that. So during that time, did you have to let someone go, fire them from their job? And if so, how did you accomplish that?
So there were a handful of times that I needed to do that for various reasons. We had an HR director that I would work through to make sure that we had a good solid case. And in most instances, if they were in a protected class or position, you had to follow those procedures and to move forward. But on the double exempts, those positions that were under the control of the agency director, we typically worked out a strategy on how to resolve those issues. First of all, when they couldn't be resolved, then it's either myself or the HR director that would directly terminate the employee. So it's certainly not an easy thing to do, but sometimes it's necessary for a variety of reasons.
Anybody else? Ms. Sullivan?
Are you more of a leader or a manager, and what approach do you use to get the highest level of performance from your team?
That's an excellent question, and I consider myself more of an adaptive leader. So when you have a group of people and you want to try to get the best results out of that group, they're accomplished, we want to try to use an adaptive management technique. So I follow that sort of adaptation by looking at the situations and providing leadership examples. When you're a manager, you might have more of a technical nature to your position. That's when you manage, is in technical situations. But in fluid situations, in public service, an adaptive management technique will allow you to get the best results, to be more innovative, to work through complex problems that aren't necessarily technical in nature, And so in observing, interpreting, and then intervening is a typical cycle that you would use in the management setting as an adaptive manager to attack and to work with others on that. If you take a more top-down approach, that's more appropriate for a technical problem or a technical situation. You have an expert at the top, and then you lead downwards by informing them of what you expect them to do and how they're going to do their jobs. And the kind of situation that you might have with department heads, and I would say that in working for the past 6 months, attending staff meetings twice a month, I've seen our department heads up close, and we have a great team here. But using an adaptive management technique that I've developed over many years of public service and many years of management will help allow for innovation, creativity, and to see problems in a different light. If you do the top-down and command control type of structure, that's appropriate for certain problems. But in a public service setting like this, I have learned that it's much more productive to have this adaptive management type of approach. It's open and inclusive, as probably point out.
As a city manager, it's oftentimes you're a participative manager and you work with groups, but there's also times when you have to be autocratic. Can you think of a scenario or a situation where you had to be autocratic, and how did that work out for you?
So I will go back to the Illinois DNR example and talk about the final decisions that need to be made in a budget process. We used an adaptive management strategy for developing numbers, prioritization for handling the problems. But in the end, when you got down to the time of submitting the budget, you had to make those final decisions and then deliver that to your department, the equivalent of department heads. You know, those decisions are final, and then they had to carry out the messaging for the legislative body and to carry that out. So that would probably be the one example that comes to mind, that we absolutely had to have discipline and message control going into a legislative cycle where we're deciding on budget issues.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody yet?
Can you describe your personal code of values? Tell us about a time you were confronted with an ethical challenge and had to rely on those values. How did you handle the situation, and what would you do differently?
One of the things that I would be very proud of is the fact that I'm always checking my actions against a set of values, a set of right and wrong. There's one particular instance in my career that was very difficult and required a resolute set of values to move forward. We found that due to technology, one of the regulatory programs at Illinois DNR was insufficient for what was coming from industry. And we could either ignore the problem and have future problems related to natural resources, or we could take a very difficult stand and advance a legislative package that would handle that and create a new regulatory program. So we took on that challenge, and I made a decision myself that we needed to advance this and start working with a legislative sponsor. It was a 2-year-long process and ended in a, I'm going to make this shorter for you, but ended in a year-long public notice, public hearing type of situation as we developed rules and regulations. That cost me a great deal of political credibility and capital with a lot of the constituent groups that I worked with. But no one was happy when you do the regulatory program. So you write rules and no one's happy, you've hit the sweet spot. Well, that's where I was, and we developed a very good and sound program, but I had to stick to my guns and my values because the impact from not taking that action was going to affect water quality and was going to be very difficult to balance both economic development and the environment in moving forward. So I think that my lessons there are that sometimes, as a leader, you're going to make very difficult decisions that no one will appreciate. But in doing so, if you can produce the results that get to your stated objectives, either balancing certain aspects of a program or providing the best public service, you will eventually win the day. But certainly, even though that was the last act, one of the last acts I did as DNR director in Illinois, that was something that I do stand by, and I'm proud that I led a team through a very difficult two-year program to create that regulatory framework.
Any follow-up?
I'll just try to make this quick. When I'm looking for ethical examples, sometimes it's just, I'll just give you one of my stories. All right, I'll make it quick though. I had a gentleman who was working for me 20 years ago, and he was our paper buyer, and he was our guy that we sent out to the different printer locations to check runs and things like that. And Matt, first name was Matt. Matt could never, ever get to work on time to save his life. I mean, he'd stroll in at 10:30, 11 o'clock. He'd miss meetings. He'd do everything. But he was the best tech person that we had at the time. My challenge as being his manager was trying to get him to commit to a timetable, which was never going to work with his personality, ever. So I had to make an ethical decision. In his last evaluation with me, I simply told him, Matt, you're very valuable. You can make more money working someplace else. He listened hard to that because he knew what my dilemma was. I was getting beat up to make sure that he towed the line. He's submitted his resignation. He works in LA. He's got a great job. We're still friends today, and that was over 20 years ago. But that was an ethical decision because I wasn't really acting on behalf of the company. I was looking at the person. So I guess I'm looking for examples like that in the way of ethics. So.
Sure. So, a similar story, that I had a high-performing manager of department, would be equivalent of a department head here, who was doing a fine job, but on his own time had violated the agency policy on political participation, and it was a blatant violation where he didn't follow the rules. There was a good deal of push to keep him, but I could not tolerate something that as serious as violating the Federal Hatch Act, and sought to fire him. Now, at that level, I needed to have their checks and balances in the hiring and firing decisions, needed to pursue that up the line, and had to continue to make the case to terminate that employee. Eventually, the rationale and the reasoning won out, and we were able to send him walking and preserve integrity at the agency, as well as making sure that there wouldn't be any liabilities in the future with violation of federal law. So I think that might be a parallel to your decision, but letting go a very good employee because of because he ethically crossed the line on his own time, certainly could have been overlooked, but it was something that I wouldn't stand for, and we had to push hard to make sure we got that done.
Anybody else? Mr. Glinski.
Okay. What are the touchstones of an ideal organization culture? Those you would find in the best and most effective public service organizations. How do you go about installing that philosophy in a team that you would lead?
Okay. Well, first of all, you have a very good team now. So this is not going to be very hard. But to answer the question, I think step one is to lead by example and to provide an atmosphere, a working environment where they can collaborate and to trust and work together. That would be something that I would work towards. I think also that demonstrating the values of public service and communicating that on a frequent basis, both internally and externally, will provide them with both an example and a compass point. So I think that those are some of the things that you would do. There are other exercises that you can do and can do through the course of a year, a budget year, either through exercises on the budget or through tackling some sort of problem together. You can set that up so that you can build teamwork and to have them tackle things together. That would also be something that you could deploy. But again, I've already seen that in my time interacting with city staff. So I think that just maintaining that is where you're at currently. But that would be how I would approach that, providing examples, working through teamwork exercises as it relates to the things that we need to do in the city administration, and trying to instill and project that both internally and externally.
Any follow-up?
How important is consistency in that message? How important is it for your office to be X, Y, and Z, and another department to be A, B, and C? To you personally, how important is it to transmit that vision so we're all on the same page?
Absolutely. I have a saying that I like to use with employees and with team members quite a bit. You gain your credibility by the thimbleful, and you throw it out by the bucket load. And so having a consistent message based on public service, on integrity and values is highly important, both internally and externally. If you're able to have a mistake that's a public mistake or a public issue, you can burn through some credibility and tarnish the credibility of the entire institution. And so being on message in terms of public service and values is incredibly important, and you need to apply that consistently. Corporate culture change or agency or administration culture change takes a long time. You have to be consistent in the application, the management application of those vision statements, those mission statements that point you towards public service or point you towards something else in a corporate setting. You have to be consistent with that, and sometimes it takes years to develop that. And so as I've been a manager and have worked in other institutions, that message needs to be consistent and persistent through a long period of time in order to make sure that you're gaining that credibility and building that capital, that public capital.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mayor Pro Tem?
So what was happening the last time a resident or a constituent said, I pay your salary and I expect immediate action? How do you work through the situation, and what was the outcome?
Council member, it's been a while since I've had a finger wagged in my face. I'm trying to think through that. Certainly not here at the Manistee Chamber. But there were times at Michigan DNR where we would field questions from either local officials or from ordinary citizens trying to address a problem that they might have. And as the regional initiatives deputy working to improve relationships at the local level, I often reached out to county commission chairs and to mayors and township supervisors. I think upon reflection, the one instance that came through was in Gladwin County, where I had a resident adjacent to a state game area built his house fairly close to the game area line. And he had built next to a non-traditional shooting range and had shooting on the weekends and sometimes even in the evenings, and was concerned about his family's public safety. He also, although it was unsubstantiated, produced results or might have produced results of shot or cartridge ending up in his property. So he was very angry and very concerned, rightfully, about his family's safety. I tackled that problem by engaging the law enforcement division to go out on multiple occasions and let them do their job. But they went out on multiple occasions and were very responsive to my inquiries to try to identify either the actual problem or the timing so that can be done. We engaged the forestry division to try to manage the land slightly differently to discourage the unofficial use of that property. Being that state forests was all legal at that point, or was at that point to use for range management. So tried to find a solution there. And I think the law enforcement folks were able to work out some sort of patrol strategy to try to help the gentleman. But it was not a very good situation for him. There was not a legal solution by just prohibiting that outright, because it was not it was an allowable use. And so I think that's probably the last time I had an unsatisfactory review of trying to tackle a problem.
Thank you.
Anybody got follow-ups? Walk us through a process improvement project you led or tackled. What prompted your review? What were you looking for? What were you looking to achieve? What steps did you employ, and what was the outcome?
Thank you. I would put as an example going through audit findings as an exercise with the entire executive team, or the equivalent of a department head, working through those audits to reduce material findings so that we can achieve an audit with reductions in those findings, and certainly reduce the ability of, or reduce the instance of repeat findings. So we went through those exercises with staff. One particular finding was about timekeeping. We, as a result of that, contracted out to a contractor development of a timekeeping system for the entire state agency that was able to track where funds were being utilized on a 15-minute increment and reduced or eliminated that audit finding. But it also helped us manage more accurately where the funds were being used and how they were being used. And so I figured that was, actually, it was a success that came out of that exercise of trying to reduce audit findings. Audits are a very important tool in financial management, Even the immaterial findings can help you identify weaknesses. And so that would be a slightly boring example, but one that helps in the overall management of an institution or an agency.
Any follow-up? I think we're back to Mr. Bachman.
What you know about us, what do you think our priorities should be for the next 3 years, and how would you tackle them?
Okay. Well, first I think that some of the largest challenges that the city has are related to capacity and resources. And so the challenges of providing city services with the resources you have and having the capacity to address the objectives. I think it is a very positive thing that the City Council has done to contract out the assessing, the engineering, the economic development pieces that allows for cost savings while also having the capacity. In this next budget, you have a position for housing that you're going to partially fund. By contracting that out, you'll be able to build capacity and help with potential housing programs. So I think that those are some of the challenges there. As you look towards dealing with blight and economic development, in order to do that in a sustainable way, you need to look at those buildings that we already have and try to incent people to rehabilitate them, to utilize them, and to move forward in building a vibrant downtown. As I've talked to and have been listening to building owners, that there are a number of challenges, significant challenges in developing those properties. Many of them have had deferred maintenance for a long period of time and have a good deal of work to bring them back up. You take the Fricano's restaurant as an example. That's a blighted property, of course, that you all have incented with an Oprah designation, but there's a lot of work that still is needed to be done inside that building. And I think if you look around the community, there's a lot of those types of situations where the work may be a little too large to make it work as a viable business interest. And so I think some of the challenges that you face with that are how do you reasonably, on behalf of the taxpayers, incent development, incent blight removal on a larger scale, not the smaller scale, but larger buildings that need to be utilized and are currently underutilized. Incenting those with both carrots and sticks, or providing the resources that it would take to take, say, the Northern Hotel into a viable use. And so I think those are some of the challenges there. On the side of providing services, parks and public works, I think that there are some needs for additional resources there that need to be looked at and find creative solutions to. But you know, there are other infrastructure and capital needs across the department heads as well, both for the fire department and for other aspects. So I think that if you boil it down to two words, capacity and resources are the challenge that we face as a community, and it will take some creative innovation in order to find ways to do that, while also you know, dealing with the fact that we do have a tax base that can only go so far. So you have to be reasonable about the approaches. That's going to take a balance that will be very difficult. But I think with the kind of management style that I've used in the past in helping agencies recover or tackling difficult intergovernmental relations at Michigan DNR, that I'll be able to help lead the team in thinking creatively about those solutions.
We have volunteer groups that want to help out with the city. as city manager, how should we support them?
Yes. Engage them would be, I'm sorry. I think that the most important thing to do is to engage those groups, encourage those groups. There are volunteers who are passionate about their community. Find ways for them to interact and to play a supportive role. Be mindful of where that leaves staff and the department heads and how they manage, but find solutions. So sit down, engage, and find ways to use that energy to make this a better place. And so I have in the past worked a good deal with external constituency groups and have found ways to support their work. And I think that would be a positive thing to do here, is to sit down and figure out a way forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other follow-up? Ms. Beaton?
When you reviewed our budget, what did you see, and what are you bringing to the table that will help us maintain our financial stability?
Wonderful. I have reviewed the budget. I think that it does a very good job of laying out the priorities from council and to work towards some of the shortcomings. I think overall very strong, and I know that the fiscal management here is working very well. So I did not see any red flags, but I think that one of the first things I'd like to do is sit down, if selected, sit down with Mr. Bradford and go over some of those items to see if there are any issues. But the objectives that you've laid out for infrastructure, for carpool, and for replacing vehicles, I think are priorities that need to happen, and those are not quite there yet. So I think there's going to be some challenges there.
Any follow-up?
Nope.
Ms. Sullivan?
I'm actually going to ask a different question than what's on here. So, I mean, you obviously have knowledge of what we're looking for. You've worked with all of us. Are you going to be able to switch from the chamber to city manager and working with different department heads and staff? You may or may have not, lost respect or trust of some of those people. How do you plan on gaining that back as city manager?
Sure. I think that the transition will be, could be a very easy one to move from the economic development piece into working for the city and for the city council. With the skills that and experiences that I have, I'm confident that I'll be able to pick that up and move forward. I would look back and also try to help the chamber with finding a replacement and to work with them so that they can continue that work on behalf of the county and the city and the stakeholders who are funding that work. So I think that that will be something that we can work out and to manage if given the opportunity. In terms of the department heads, I think that my approach so far and working in the community for the last year and 10 months, I'm fairly certain that we have good working relationships now. I've been responsive and have built up trust and credibility there. I hope in the next few months that if I need to work on any issues with trust and credibility, either with you or with staff, that we'll be able to sit down and work out any of those issues and resolve any misunderstandings or anything else that might be out there. But I do think that in the last year and 10 months, we've done a lot of very positive things and made some significant strides forward. That will continue, and I will work with the chamber in order to make a transition smooth if possible, and make sure the work continues. I also think that economic development will be one part of the city manager's job moving forward, regardless of who you decide to guide the next phase in city management. So I hope that answers your question. I'd welcome a follow-up if I've missed anything.
I have a follow-up. Oh, do you?
Go ahead.
Just going back to our most recent experience with the Hampton Inn project. I think my impression of what happened there is that it probably could have been promoted a little more strongly right from the beginning. Obviously, there was an avalanche of people who were against it. And the city council got tons and tons of emails and criticism from the citizens. It was in every part of social media that you can imagine. So when I look at economic development, I want to see a strong presence there, and I didn't particularly sense it at the time, because there's so many different ways in social media that you can reach out to people, and it has to be continual. I mean, you can't just say, okay, I did an interview and it's done. You're not done. You're hardly even scratched the surface. You've got to, with something that's so sensitive, you've just got to keep a message out there, and you have to reach it in all levels. I mean, it's got to be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the newspaper, radio, TV. That's what I would expect, not just economic development person to do, but the city manager. So I'm looking for those kind of strengths in a city manager.
Well, let me point out, I think that's a great question. Actually, you're kind of leading into one of the questions I would have for City Council on communications. So I think this is a great, I'll reserve my time for later if I have it. But let me point out a couple of things with the Hampton Inn project. On economic development, we can't always be so forthright with all of the details in a project. And that's out of respect for the business case, for the developers. And so you respect their wishes in terms of how much information is getting out and what they'd like to see get out. And so I think one of the lessons learned from the Hampton Inn project was that when we pushed them to come before City Council and describe the wonderful news that was about to happen, we did rush them a bit on the design work. And they literally received their design from their architect. They did not have much time to review or revise that work. And it went in December, as is, for your presentation. That was probably something that we would like to take back because it wasn't enough yet. We weren't working through the details. And so in hindsight, let's reserve those visual cues and maybe hold back on information so that we can be informative, but maybe not necessarily show that the cake is half-baked at that point. So there's a sweet spot there on working with the development, working with developers on how much information to put forward and how you communicate that. I worked very closely with them for a period of months and with city staff on resolving issues, tackling problems, and kind of adaptive management facilitated approach that worked very well in building trust and credibility. We were knocking down a lot of the issues with that project. But as we were approaching the Planning Commission decision point, we knew we were battling that first perception of putting that normal Hampton Inn box out there. And so we really struggled with that. But I think that in terms of communications, I think it's wise to be open and transparent as much as you can get out there to inform not only City Council, but also just everyone in the community about what is going on and what is the positive incremental changes that are happening in Manistee. I think that we can utilize a communication strategy that will help us achieve our goals. One is informing the public. We also had to make sure that the Planning Commission had information that was relevant and timely and meeting their information needs. And so some of the tactics and communication strategies that you would deploy can be social media, can be direct communications and picking up the phone and letting decision makers know what's in store. It can be media releases. It could also, and I wouldn't recommend this in this particular instance, but town halls and public meetings to inform the public. So which of those steps you take really will depend on the developer and how much of the project they're willing to put out there. With the Suburban Inns team, they took a very open approach and wanted details out there early, and that's commendable. And I think that they're going to fit in well in the community. But I think that we can try to devise strategies that might reflect what the community wants to see, and maybe hold back on some of those details rather than being out front. So it was because of where we were at, we had to adjust, and that what caused a lot of the public outcry because we went too far, too fast with the information, with the visual, and didn't necessarily follow that up until months later with the revised plans. And I think certainly that also in hindsight, having a developer produce a video that shows the detail and shows what it looked like and will answer directly some of the concerns that the community had is a strategy that we should have moving forward. But in terms of communication strategy, there's lots of tactics to deploy, and there's you just have to figure out what your objectives are and how to move the project forward. So I think there were lessons to be learned. But I think in the most part, dealing with developments, you're going to probably be have less information out there as a result of the developers wishing to keep some of those internal decisions private until such a time that it can be made public. So I hope that
You certainly
answers.
gave me your viewpoint, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mark.
Any other follow-up? Martin Pontiac?
We have approved a recreational plan and a master plan that sets priorities. Getting agreement around these goals and strategies will be important. Walk us through a time when you faced a challenge of building an agreement around a set of city council and community goals. What strategies did you use to get the best outcome?
I think if I may go back to one of the prouder accomplishments answers, I go back to working with the County of Saginaw and the Saginaw Parks and Rec Department. That was an instance where we, as a state, were seeing that the county and the community had an inability to acquire the land and to provide that public access to its citizens. I came in and approached that project knowing that we had to work with the community to help them achieve their goals by providing an extra boost from the state level to help them accomplish their goals. And so that was developed hand in hand with the county commission chair, and with the Parks and Rec executive director, utilizing their own planning documents for providing more urban recreational access, and work through that and to achieve those goals. The steps we took after that were guided by those community objectives. And we knocked down or worked through a punch list of the brownfield issues, the ownership issues, worked through alternative funding sources, so we raised money from outside, worked through state and federal assent on that as well, because there were some complicating pieces of funding that needed to come in. We worked through all of those issues to achieve the community result of providing better outdoor recreation access in an urban area like Saginaw.
Any follow-up? Mr. Kabowski.
Okay, Mark, what the continued success and stability of our River Street Business District is very important to our residents. What concepts do you bring with you to further collaboration with our independent businesses to target ongoing success? I know you've worked a lot down there.
This is a softball, I think, a softball question. But let me address it for your benefit. We have 16 vacant stores, vacant storefronts in our downtown district. We do not have a shortage of businesses that are looking to move into our downtown. We have people who are contacting the chamber, contacting me directly, asking for help in locating a place to set up their business. That would lead to job creation, a more vibrant downtown that would create an experience for visitors that make them come back, make them spend more money, stay longer, all of the above. And so we need to tackle why it is that those storefronts are not open, why they're not being leased or not being used. So one thing that we've implemented, and I haven't had the opportunity to report this to council yet, but we have developed a survey for commercial property owners to get at some of those issues. Why are they, what are they interested in leasing to? What are some of the challenges? Are they interested in developing housing associated with the project? Do they need assistance? Would they be open to receiving grants or exploring grants? Those are some of the questions in that survey. We've also gone through and spoken to many of these folks, trying to encourage a higher utilization rate for our downtown. So we need to tackle that. And I mentioned this in an earlier question and answer about the challenges of resources and capacity. When you look at some of these properties, and I'll give you an example. I don't necessarily name the building, but I had working with developers, had them tell me post-mortem, they walked away from a project that the project needed about 1.6 million in order to bring that building up to a possible use. And the other part of that is that they can make the business case on a pro forma document that they could almost get there and make it a viable business operation. They needed $250,000 more in some sort of incentive package. And so you can look at that information and listen to that information, listen to that developer and say, okay, we've got a challenge here, we need to try to address that. That's going to directly lead us to more utilization of our properties. Also, in talking to another building owner, they also too know that they need to make improvements, but the amount of improvements are too much for their budget and have to do it a little at a time. And by listening to that building owner, learned that their challenges are about resources and labor and getting improvements made. And so I think that we have the interest. The investment at the West Shore Community College, the Hampton Inn, have prompted a good deal of interest. The potential for the Gateway project moving forward. People are recognizing that Manistee is moving forward and it's time to come in and develop and to take an opportunity to create their vision of their business. The challenges are that we have these beautiful old buildings, but they unfortunately need a lot of work. And so we need to figure out ways to either capture state incentives or look at the community's potential for incentives in order to build that up. We'll try to do that piecemeal, one case at a time, or another option is to go out and bring in developers who have resources that, and may be interested in investing for a longer term, even though it might not meet their immediate business case. That's a bit of a challenge, but I think we can try to do that in the near term, in the near future, try to encourage that type of investment. But it's going to be a challenge finding someone who's going to look at the bottom line and look through a business case or a pro forma document and find that that makes sense for them to invest that much money in a property that might put them underwater.
Any follow-up? Mayor Pro Tem?
Tell us about your experience with public unions and explain how your approach to labor negotiations. What kind of administrator do to assure that a solid working relationship is the outcome of a settled contract?
Councilmember, can you repeat that last part?
What can an administrator do to assure that a solid working relationship is the outcome of a settled contract?
Thank you. Thank you for repeating that. My experience as being an agency director is that we had 90% of our employees were unionized in probably nearly 20, maybe 15 different bargaining units. You know, there were, in the law enforcement division, there were 3. In parks, there were 2. So that all added up over time. But we were involved in negotiations. It almost seemed like it was a year-round thing with the HR department. We even had a labor negotiator full-time. But my approach in working with and sitting down with union leaders was to be open and forthright about what was our situation, to be honest about things, and to put that approach into use by putting cards on the table. And I think that for the most part, they appreciated that, but we also had a bit of a strong position as well in terms of how much was available for increases or for other benefits. So you might have a slightly different approach here with 4 different bargaining units. But I think that if we're honest and open, we can try to avoid going to arbitration. That would be an approach that I would try to take with them. We're sitting across the table. We're human beings. We're just trying to get to a common objective. And so if we can work towards that, it should be a positive experience.
Any follow-up? City managers can sometimes find themselves in a tug-of-war between departments with competing resource needs, residents or neighborhoods with rival desires, city council members with various priorities or policy positions. What is your go-to strategy in dealing with conflict or different viewpoints?
So I would say that the strategy is listen first. Try to understand where the different entities or people, individuals are coming from, and then sit down and discuss what it is that we're trying to achieve together. By laying out those objectives, we try to resolve some of the issues. And it's not always going to work. It may take a while, But if you come from it, a place of openness and active listening, I think you might be able to resolve a few problems. But sitting down, listening, and being able to have discussions will be the best go-to strategy that I would deploy.
Any follow-up? Mr. Bachman?
Mark, tell us a story about an employee you worked with who you're most proud of and what brought you to that point of being proud of that person. What'd they do?
Okay. I would say that if I might give two examples. One would be when I promoted, I'll name her, although I would be very careful about details, promoted Debbie Bruce at the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. She was a division manager. I promoted her to be the fisheries chief. And she had a stellar record of accomplishing great things, working on complex issues, and being able to deliver. When I promoted her, she did an absolutely fantastic job for the remainder of her tenure, which outlasted me as director. And she was nationally recognized for her work. It's also a proud moment, too, that when I promoted her, she was one of 3 out of 50 states, one of 3 female fisheries chiefs in the entire country. So recognizing her skill set and giving her an opportunity is one of those times that I'm very proud of. I'll mention the second one, if you'll allow, when I first came in at Illinois DNR, I had one slot open for assistant director. And I came up with a very creative solution to help put the constituent groups at ease and to help put the employees at ease. I went out in a very unusual way, went to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and asked their leadership, regional leadership, if we could take one of their Fish and Wildlife employees who had an amazing track record, much like Debbie Bruce, and to bring that person on an interim basis for a period of 2 years and then renewing it afterwards. If I could bring that person on to increase the credibility of the agency with its constituents and with others. I reached out to Mr. Rogner, and he agreed that he would serve in that capacity. He served me for 4 years before he needed to go back to the federal agency. That did absolute wonders for morale, for constituent relations. So that was a very smart move to bring him aboard. And also, because we had mentioned the mismanagement of funds, it also calmed some of the concerns that the federal agencies had about how we were going to manage money. And so I'm very proud of his accomplishments. And actually, after he ended his time with me as my number 2, he went back and finished out his career at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and retired. Then Illinois DNR reached back out to him again. He's back in that role, serving in as a second retirement. So that longevity is something that I am proud of, because when you make these personnel decisions, you're making them for the long term. And I'm sure you understand that. But you're making it for the long term, and those will have lasting impacts even when you're done serving or you're done in that position. So those are 2 very good examples of what I'm proud of.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
So, do you have somebody in your career that basically did the same thing, that saw something in you and mentored you to the next level?
Yes, I do. And I will answer this question. I hope it won't come across as political. I'm somebody who believes in we work with everyone, but that person that gave me a chance and recognized my talents and skill sets was, at first, Lieutenant Governor Pat Quinn. So I worked for Pat Quinn for 11 years, nearly 11 years, as lieutenant governor and then as governor. He recognized in me a policy expertise and some communications skills and communication strategy. He mentored me through a lot of issues and worked with me to improve my talents and give me experience both in leadership and in communication and constituent issues. He, prior to becoming governor, actually asked me for my resume at one point, and I questioned him and I said, I'm not quite sure why you want my resume. I'm doing a good job. What's going on here? He asked for it. He didn't tell me the answer, but you delivered. You did what you were told. I found out later that he was submitting my name to be the Illinois DNR director, even though he wasn't governor yet. And so I'll cut the story slightly short there. There's a lot of interesting drama there, but when he became governor in 2009, I was his first appointment. Before he appointed a chief of staff, before he appointed a transportation secretary. So I had his confidence and full faith that I could do the job. And trust, I worked very hard not to let him down, and I did a good job. Also, in terms of longevity, I worked on a national level with other DNR directors, other fish and game directors. It's something that you tended nationally to have a length of tenure of about 3 years. I lasted 6. I made it through 6, so I doubled what was expected nationally. I'm very proud of that, and I think that his leadership and his belief in me are partly of what made me successful and made me have the skill set that I currently have.
Any follow-up? Ms. Beaton?
I'm going to change this question up a little bit because you've already answered parts of it.
Sure.
What have you done in your past to recruit a more diverse candidate pool? And how would you apply that to city council manager?
Wonderful. With the Division of Law Enforcement at Illinois DNR, I encouraged our employees to go out into differing underserved areas and to try to work on recruitment, educational programming and so forth, so that we can, in the instances where we could, show people that they had a possible avenue, whether it be female or persons of color. We also created urban collegiate scholarships, tapping into the Chicagoland area, providing college students with the opportunity to work for the summer for the agency and to see the different careers that they might view as possible. Some of them did apply and at the Illinois DNR. We also created an office of community outreach, which I should now call community inclusion. But we worked through developing programming, education, and talent attraction programming for underserved communities throughout the state. So we were trying to work towards increasing the diversity in our candidate pool, because, as I mentioned before, many of the hiring processes were double blind or not able to be weighted in a certain way towards those considerations. So increasing the candidate pool is the best way to do that. Then I'll also finally say that on a national scale, working with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, I served as committee chair for the diversity group, which is part of the Education Outreach and Diversity Committee at AFWA. I was working on strategies to increase diversity in the natural resources field, and worked with other directors at that point to find strategies that would increase the profession and increase and work with universities universities to increase the talent pipeline. So there's a good deal of interest there and some results. It's a very difficult and long task, and still being worked on today at universities and agencies like that. But for the city community, I think that the important pieces are outreach to differing backgrounds, and encouraging people to apply. And that's a one-on-one situation oftentimes, working with individuals.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? Ms. Sullivan?
What tools and techniques would you use to keep our our participating partners and community informed in our government?
Councilmember, I'm very sorry, I missed the first part of that.
What tools or techniques would you use?
Okay. So, now I'm going to go back to a communication strategy question here. I think that in engaging different organizations, utilizing different tactics to inform them or to work with them or provide opportunities would be an approach that could work here. I think that also to just individualized engagement. So if we need to sit down with a volunteer group or sit down with the Elks or Rotary or any other groups that might be interested in engaging with the community, with the city, we'll have to reach out and do those sorts of tasks by communicating. So Facebook or social media can be one tactic to use, but there are multiple others that would be as successful, and I think we can consider deploying all of them. And going back to Councilmember Beaton's question to me earlier, I will probably ask about a communication strategy and what you think the issues are for that are necessary, or some of the things you need to do. But I think we've seen a few of these questions now where engaging constituent groups, making sure the information is out there, are going to be part of what your likely answer might be.
Any follow-up? Ms. Sullivan, or Ms. Martin-Pontiac?
What is the most important skill a manager can have when it comes to council-manager relationship? Can you tell us about a time when you had to rely on that skill to build on relationships?
Sure. I think I've answered this already in another way, but listening is a very important skill for communication and for managing. I think that when you take an adaptive management approach, being able to observe what's going on or observe what the facts are is a very important first step. You do that by listening or watching, and I think as a manager that would be probably the most important skill you're going to have. And that's something you deploy every day, whether you're with employees, with supervisors, or with a legislative oversight body like the city council. You're going to have to make sure your communication skills are fully utilized, and you do that best by listening. So I think that would be how I would answer that. Now, there can be other tactics, and certainly having an understanding of reading the situation with employees or with constituent groups are important. So those are probably secondary skills. But if you can start out by listening, you can get a long way towards having good, positive working relationships for change.
Any follow-up? Mr. Kowalski?
Okay, we are coming up on your third year evaluation. As you are looking back at our progress, what will we have accomplished together that will define success for you and for our residents?
Wonderful. I think that a continuation of the public services that people rely upon, so important infrastructure pieces, water, sewer, trash, that be able to provide those services along with the Parks Department, police, law enforcement, and fire, that is going to be one of the important pieces. Did we deliver and did we serve the public? Number two, I think that if we're able to continue our positive incremental change on the path of economic development and housing, I think that providing those two pieces will be something, looking backwards, will be something that will be very positive. So are we creating new businesses, new jobs? Are we creating a vibrant downtown? Are we seeing increased visitation? Those would be metrics that I think would be something that would be very good. And then third, for the management piece, how are we doing financially? Would be something else that should be on a performance evaluation discussion. Did we manage the finances, and were we able to move forward on meeting the council's objectives?
Any follow-up? Mayor Pro Tem?
So fit between the community and manager goes both ways. What attributes must a community or organization have before you are willing to go to work there?
I think that having a positive work environment that's supportive of team members is something that is a necessary ingredient for that kind of decision. So are we, do we have the potential for moving forward? Will be a second piece. So is this a mission or an objective that I can believe in? Will I have passion for it? Will I be able to make a difference? So I think those are some of the key pieces in looking at an organization or an institution. You know, can I make a difference? Is it a positive work environment? And does it have a good mission that I feel passionate about?
Any follow-up? How do you stay organized?
Well, I will give you a line here and say that a good sharp pencil tip's better than a long memory. And I think that writing down and making lists is one of my go-to organizational methods or techniques. So trying to keep track of everything by writing it down is something that I do. I hope that's the kind of flavor you're looking for with the organizational skills. But in terms of an organization, I think that following or utilizing planning techniques and having a plan with objectives is an important step. So that's both the personal and the organizational.
Any follow-up? What are two of your strengths?
So, being able to listen and to read a situation would be one of the skills. And the second skill is being able to break down complex matters and communicate them in a way that hopefully is understandable. Sometimes I might miss the mark, but having the skill for taking a complex situation and explaining it so that people can understand would be the second.
Okay. You can now make a closing statement if you'd like. You have a closing statement? We're pretty well done asking questions.
Thank you. I hope that you all will consider my qualifications and my experience. And I know that, as has been stated, my management experience in directing an agency is not quite exactly city management. But I think that those skills and that experience will translate into a potential for being a successful city manager that makes a difference. I also think that, I contemplated long and hard about taking this interview. And I feel that my experience, if considered, can make a difference for Manistee. And I want to make that difference. And I feel that I have the opportunity to do that, either staying in my current position or in accepting an additional position. But furthermore, I mean, one thing that encouraged me to come back was that if you can consider and look at my skills, look at my experience, and if that can help you all as council members make an informed decision on who the next city manager might be, and it might not be me. You might choose to go in another direction. But if I can help inform that decision and help Manistee move forward, even if it's not me, then I will have considered this evening a success. And so I think that if I can help in any way to move the community forward, I will do that. And I think that having the opportunity tonight, which I'm very grateful for, will possibly help you in your decision making. So I hope that you will see that that passion, that skill set might be able to serve the community. But I can guarantee you, I will be here for many years, if not serving in a different capacity, and we'll be back before you talking about positive incremental change at another point in time. So hopefully you'll consider that, and we'll perhaps have a conversation next week.
Do you have any questions for us?
Yes, sir, I do. I had wanted to ask if we talked about, as we talked about management styles tonight, if the top-down command or authoritative approach, as you mentioned, was one that you would prefer to see, or if you were more interested in a candidate that had a more open, inclusive style working with staff, because I want to make sure that I can also make a good decision if asked, is this going to be a good fit? So what is the preference from city council members, either individually or collectively, in a management style? Top-down, command and control, or some other more open and inclusive approach?
We're going to get 7 different answers. Anybody want to tackle it?
No, I think that just following up with how our previous city manager operated, I believe that would be inclusive. And I think that no one on council had any objections to how he managed.
I think it's also, like you said, it's situational. I mean, there's days when you have to be authoritative, and there are days, 99% of the time, you're inclusive and participative, but there are days when you have to be authoritative. And we need a city manager who can do both, who can step up and be the guy that can do that. We need a guy who also knows how to communicate and work with us and work with the staff, and we need a hybrid.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there are times when you need to do that. I think your follow-up question was spot on about when you need to do that. And there are times when you have to turn that off and deliver the message. And that's where we talked about message discipline. That's something that I think you're spot on about. I'd be interested in any other comments too, if there are any.
Other comments?
Late. We got another candidate we still got to interview.
Right.
We're supposed to start at 8 o'clock, so.
And I think
I look for a management skill that puts trust in the people that are working here, puts trust in our staff, works with them to accomplish their goals and council's goals. That's the kind of management skill I look for. I don't like micromanagers. There's a lot of different ways to get from point A to point B. As long as they get there and they do it in a timely manner, it works. Follow the process, follow the procedures. That's my style. Anybody else?
Just one quick comment. I would like to see a manager that actually knows the names of every employee that works for the city of Manistee, and that you can go into any department and you can walk into the DPW department, you can walk into the fire station, you can walk in the police department and know everybody's name and know something personal about them because you spent time talking to them. No cronyism, just all-inclusive. That's what I'm looking for.
Anything else, Mr. Miller?
Well, I heard that we have another candidate to get to, so
Yep.
I'll reserve any further questions. But thanks again for the opportunity and for hearing
Our
me.
council member can do the same thing. Do you know any of them?
We're going to take a break. A couple minutes.
Welcome back. The only guy that got the comeback. How about that, huh?
William, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Mayor.
I think you know the process. Well, about 60 seconds, we'll be over through the interview. No, it'll be 60, I know, 60 minutes. We have a series of questions we'll be asking, and we will provide you at time at the end to ask questions if you have them, and also to give a closing remarks if you have them. Get right into it. You have undoubtedly done significant research about our community, our organization. Why do you want to be City of Manistee next manager? And what unique background, skills, or experience do you possess that will make you successful here?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, members of council, for having me back. It's good to be here. What interested me in the City of Manistee is that it's a beautiful community with lots of amenities. There's challenges coming up with, we're going to have the infrastructure grant coming, or bill being passed. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And I've worked in the past getting grants during the Recovery Act, and I think it's a good opportunity that we can work with this community to make sure we get the dollars spent in the right way. And I think it's a beautiful community. I've also worked on a grant to get an aerial truck for a fire truck, so I'd like to do that here as well. And all in all, I just think it's a nice community, a good place to raise a family, and I'd like to take the next step in my career and be a city manager here. Thank you.
Any follow-up? From your resume, it appears you have a career filled with accomplishments. Tell us about two which you are most proud of.
Two I would mention. One was at the City of St. Clair Shores when I first arrived there. They were trying to get a skate park put into their kite and rope facility, and they haven't had much luck with grants, but they've been doing a lot of fundraising throughout the community. I think they raised about $30,000 towards the match, and a council member passed away, and that was one project that he worked on. So I felt very, very fortunate. We were able to get the grant dedicated to that council member, and it's widely used. Even though it took about 6 years from the start of that project to actually the community it being in place, it wasn't something that was just a fad. The community made use of that project, and it was nice to see, something tangible come out of that work and something that the community enjoyed. Another project I'm really proud of is when I first started, first full-time job at the City of Warren. I took on what I mentioned earlier, the Recovery Act. We had received an energy efficiency block grant. I did 6 projects with that, $1.5 million, $3 million. One was a collaboration with a community college to do a green roof on a police station. Part of it we trained 8 workers to get their certification in green roofing. We also did improvements to the lighting, the HVAC, so some other much needed projects around the city. So that was kind of a really fun, really good project to kind of start off my career. Thank you.
Any follow-up? If offered the position, What will your first 3 months look like in Manistee?
Well, looking at the paper today, I would make sure to get options for the recycling, whether it's increasing the amount of pickups there, getting another cardboard trailer, or also maybe a combination of also doing some at-home curbside pickup once a month, something like that. But giving council some options of how they'd like to address that, some benefits and some pros and cons to each, but then with cost. Some of the other things, making sure that I meet with the stakeholders and partners, make sure that the city's maintaining those relationships that can help when we look for those infrastructure dollars, that we can partner and make sure that we can get win-wins with our partners, and then also try to establish some new relationships with nearby townships. Maybe something like is it Filler Township to the south, doing that, working on implementing some of those recommendations in that countywide master plan, like the trail around Manistee Lake, and then also working with the Chamber of Commerce that implement some of those recommendations in the economic development plan, facade improvements, and then also focusing on blight and seeing how we can address that, either through if people need a loan to do a house improvement, if we need to have a stricter ordinance about if it's not cleaned up, then the city will do it and charge. But having just kind of a range of options of how we can deal with blight. Thank you.
Any follow-up? Tell us about a poor professional decision you made or about a time you may have failed as a leader. This could include a time when you were fired or asked to resign. What did you learn from that experience, and how does this shape you as a manager?
I think I mentioned this one last time, but when I took on that first big project with the 6 projects for the energy efficiency block grant, you had to commit the funds within 18 months. I was trying to get all the contracts in place through the attorney's office and all the bids coming back. And I was realizing that I was running a little tight on the timeline. So I did ask for an extension, which I realized at some point I wasn't going to make it, so that was my mistake. But I did ask for an extension. They did give it to me, but I think I learned a valuable lesson of kind of with the timelines, when things start changing, you have to make sure to inform the council, the elected officials, my coworkers, make sure everyone's in the loop with what's going on, what the next steps are. So that was a learning experience for me.
Any follow-up? Mr. Bachman.
Mr. Bachman. When we call on people who work with you over the years, what will they tell us about you? And tell us a word or a phrase that an employer or a close peer might describe you as versus what a boss or elected official might use.
You're asking what a peer would say?
Yeah.
I think they would say that I'm diligent. I keep at something. So even though maybe at this moment something isn't coming together, they'll see that I'm always working on trying to accomplish a goal, whether it be if it doesn't come out this year, it's going to be next year. I just always keep that on the radar, and I think people would say that about me.
Your bosses see you the same way as your peers do and your employees do?
I believe so.
Okay.
Any follow-up? Ms. Beaton?
When hiring a new department director to join and strengthen your team, what characteristics and/or attributes are you looking for, and what are those?
I think level-headedness is one, creativity, someone who's going to have kind of a vision so that they can be a leader, so that they're looking kind of the goal, keeping the goal in mind with the day-to-day, but then also a good manager to make sure that things are happening when they need to happen, and not afraid to hurt some feelings if they need to be, just because, I mean, at the end of the day, things need to get done. So I think those are some qualities that help the director and would be helpful to have as my director and my directors.
Any follow-up? Ms. Sullivan?
Are you more of a leader or a manager, and what approach do you use to get the highest level of performance from your team?
I feel like I've done both. I think it's important to, I've done both as a leader and a manager. For example, when working at the Nautical Mile, I worked with council, consultant to kind of come up with a vision for what projects we can do in the Nautical Mile and St. Clair Shores. And then I've managed by making sure that we've renovated an old dilapidated bathhouse and turned it into a vibrant beach house. And now I have a pier about $6 million pier project out to bid. And these were areas where they were neglected for many years, decades. So I think having a vision as a leader and then being a manager, I would say I've done both.
Any follow-up?
Can you describe your personal code of values for us? Tell us about a time you were confronted with an ethical challenge and had to rely on those values. How did you handle the situation, and what would you do differently?
So I think when I worked in a strong mayor form of government, it's a little bit different, but there was definitely more politics and when I started, and there was kind of some infighting going on between the elected official and a person who had left, and I was asked to provide information from someone's Facebook, and I deleted my account, but it's just to be in a situation where and it wasn't something that was benefiting the organization to be in that position. So I feel like, whereas at that time my elected official did not appreciate that, my boss, and it did hurt my career at that level, but I'm proud I did that because I don't think it was appropriate, without going into too many details, but it's kind of a messy situation, and I didn't participate.
Any follow-up? Mr. Grabowski?
What are the touchstones of an ideal organizational culture, those you would find in the best and most effective public service organizations? How do you go about installing that philosophy in a team?
Can you repeat the first part of the question, please?
Sure. What are the touchstones of an ideal organizational culture, those you would find in the best and most effective public service organizations?
I would say customer service, realizing that we're here because of we serve our residents, making sure we're giving quality services, we're responsive to the needs of the community. So I think in general, being there for people, being accessible, making sure that City Hall is a welcoming place to residents for their ideas, for their input, and when they have concerns and complaints, we address them. So I would say the foundation is customer service. And then I would say efficiency is right up there as well, to make sure we do it as efficiently as possible with the taxpayers' money.
Any follow-up? Mayor Pro Tem?
So what was happening the last time a resident said, I pay your salary and I expect immediate action? How did you work through the situation and what was the outcome?
So working as a manager at a city, I do get that a couple times. Not so much during COVID because people weren't coming in, but we're starting to see it again. But when that happens, I generally try to find out what the issue is. Sometimes they're just upset because their water bill is high. Maybe they had a leak if the water bill is the issue. But you talk about the ways we can help prevent that in the future. If they could be signed up for, a leak notice. You can also give them a payment plan. So there's options I would say I would try to tell them what options we have available to them to help resolve the issue if they can't make the full payment, offer a payment plan for this water bill hypothetical. If it's an issue where, you know, they think their meter might be bad, we can have the water department check their meter. But just making sure they get a response and understood that we're looking into whatever issue, you know, to make sure that it's something that if we need to address it, we're going to address it.
Any follow-up questions? Walk us through a process, improvement project you led or tackled. What prompted your review? What were you looking to achieve? What steps did you employ, and what was the outcome?
We were dealing with high water last year in Lake St. Clair, and we had several erosion problems. One was we lost a significant part of our beach, and it was at Veterans Memorial Park, and it was actually hollowing out a corner where we're losing a tree that was kind of, and then we had a path right by there that was in danger of going into the lake. So we looked at options of what we could do there. I started contacting different material suppliers and asking the Army Corps if they had any recommendations for what we could do. It seemed like sandbags were the only thing they had a recommendation for, but we started talking to some engineers, different, not just the city engineer, but some other firms that dealt more with erosion and beach restoration. And we came up with a plan to refill the beach would be like would be $1 million project, and we could possibly do that with an EPA grant if we could get one down the road. But we needed to save the path, so we wanted to do something that would protect the path, be less expensive. We started looking at options of and the way that the water would go down in March and February. So I came up with a plan to install limestone to protect the beach, so that even if, and then put some fabric behind it and install kind of an aggregate base so that it wouldn't shift with higher water. And so that was installed, and it was a fraction of the cost. It was about $30,000 or $35,000. So it's been successful. We have a functioning beach, even though it does have a limestone barrier. It's still a very functional beach at this point, as opposed to we're not at the point where we're going to lose a walking path.
Any follow-up? Mr. Bachman?
Based on what you've learned about us so far, what do you think our priorities should be for the next 3 years, and what process would you use to get us there?
I think for the next 3 years, I would think making sure we're set up with different stakeholders to do the best to be able to get some infrastructure funds to work on the roads, to work on any other aging infrastructure. I think we could work on Douglas, getting First Street Park, getting some of those playgrounds ADA compliant, getting some funds for that. I think making sure we're attracting businesses, marketing the vacant building or storefronts, so we can attract different vendors, employers to the area. And then I think advertising the city, I think, would be kind of something to let people know what a jewel this area is, and with the natural beauty and the historic downtown.
Speaking of natural beauty, we have volunteers who work with us for the city. How should we manage them? What does the city should they expect from us?
They should expect gratitude, recognition, and appreciation. I think that's the cornerstone of a community, is I think having volunteers who care about the community enough to spend their time, their free time, to make events happen, to make just make the city lively. So the city I currently work in has 30 boards of commission. They put on parades, they put on all sorts of events. They work on making sure that the waterfronts environmentally friendly, that they have. So there's a wide variety, and I think I see Manistee in a very similar way, that they have very good volunteers, very active community, and I think that's what makes a city special.
Other than appreciate, how does the city support them? What does the city do for them?
I
They
think,
do for us?
well, you give them some money in the budget so that they can prioritize what they do. I think meeting space. And, yeah, and then if they need support in terms of they're closing a street, are they gonna need DPW to help out? Are they gonna need the police there? Meeting with them to find out what their needs are to accomplish their committees or their volunteer goals.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Meaden?
When you reviewed our budget, what did you see and what are you bringing to the table that will help us maintain financial stability? Knowing that you came from a much larger city with almost 60,000 people and a fairly affluent area as well of southeastern Michigan. There's some similarities, but there's obviously some major differences. So
Yes, and
tell me what you see.
looking at your budget, I did see that looks like there's some opportunity to refinance some bonds to save some money. That's something we look at. I also saw the motor pool. We always have to make sure we're budgeting to kind of pay, if we're gonna have a replacement schedule for this vehicle every X amount of years, we're gonna make sure we're putting aside the depreciation. We're paying rent out of a certain budget for that. That way we're covered, we don't have dips and valleys. And that's something we work on, making sure that those are correct. So there's similarities there. It looks like healthy fund balance. You don't want to dip into it too much, but I think just making sure that you're looking for grants and other funding sources as well, so that you don't have to put a burden on the general fund.
Any follow-up? Ms. Sullivan?
I think you've already answered this a couple times, but what projects with external funding streams would you think about pursuing here?
I think it seems like the MDNR is prioritizing ADA compliance for playgrounds, and it seems like that's a good one that we could get some funding for. The aerial fire truck, having worked on one that was successful, I have a template, and I think I could help with that one as well. Those are the kind of the two that stand out to me right now, and
We have approved a recreational plan and a master plan that sets priorities. Getting agreement around these goals and strategies will be important. Walk us through a time when you faced the challenge of building agreement around a set of city council and community goals. What strategies did you use to get the best outcome?
so I've done both a 5-year master plan to when I was interim Parks Director, and I've also worked on the 8th Amendment for our Tifa district, which led to those improvements I was talking about earlier. But for the 8th Amendment, when I did an RFP to hire an urban architect firm, and we had a joint meeting with our Tifa group and our council when it was to a point where we thought we had kind of a good plan enough of a plan that we felt like we were able to get some input and figure out where we had some things that maybe some council members didn't like. We could make adjustments. So I think it's bringing it to the stakeholders at a time when decisions can be made, not at a time later on when it's kind of way past. You have to find a time when there's some decision points and there's enough that you can get a consensus, figure out where there's a consensus. So I think the collaborative effort is kind of talking with members of council, talking with different members of a board, having community input sessions as well, providing an ability for people to provide written comment, public hearings, so that those things can be, you just have to be able to take those things in and then address them and find out where there's consensus. But it's generally having, I know I didn't do it in the timeline fashion, but it is having, things like community meetings, having the public hearing at council, putting out notices that, this is what we're discussing. If you have any input, it can be delivered to the clerk's office. You can You can send an email, that way it's in writing, it can be read at the council meeting. So just providing a lot of opportunities for people to talk, or to get the information out there about what's the priority and what they'd like to see happen when making these plans. Because I think the worst thing is if you make a plan and then people say, well, this isn't even on there. And so that's why it's important that it all comes to the table before it's finalized.
Any follow-up questions?
I have one. Would you be willing to do like town hall meetings to get input from the public?
Yes, so, yes, I've worked on those for that master plan. And then, yes, I would be willing to do that. Are you thinking for road projects or just
I just think it'd be
anything?
helpful. I hear a lot of that around. Why can't we have a neighborhood meeting or a town hall meeting or something? So on some of these projects. So I'm thinking that that's a direction that maybe we should think about using. Strategy we should.
Yeah, that would, and we could do it at Ramsdale, or you can do it, if it's gonna be a street project, you can do it if we're gonna tent out, or, just to cover and have the engineer and answer questions, talk about the next steps, put flyers out beforehand to notify people it's gonna happen.
Any other follow-up? Mr. Gawalski?
The continued success and stability of our River Street business district is very important to our residents. What concepts do you bring with you to further collaboration with our independent businesses to target success?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that beginning?
Well, it's basically the success of our River Street businesses downtown is very important to everybody. So what concepts do you bring that you could further work with people to target success for them?
So recently I've been working with, we have a downtown in St. Clair Shores that's separate from the nautical mile, and they want to start a DDA, and we set up a social district there, which I noticed that I saw the stickers on the ground when I was out here walking. And so one thing, I've been meeting with them weekly to kind of plan events, because we're going to be closing the street for these, and they want to give a band. And so I think meeting with them regularly about their concerns is important. We have a couple of business organizations at the city I work in, and just kind of keeping them up to speed on what the city's doing, any plans in the area, but also hearing their concerns, because their perspective on what needs to be done, we don't always see that unless we talk to them. So I think regular meetings is what's needed, and making sure we're accessible to the business community, especially in the downtown.
Any follow-up? Mr. Szymanski?
Tell us about your experience with public unions and explain how you approach labor negotiations. What can an administrator do to assure that a solid working relationship is the outcome of a settled contract?
So in the labor negotiations I've been involved in, I think it's centered around that there's only so much, where, you have your pension, you have your multiplier, you have these other fringes, and you have wages, and you have this, if it's going to be a 2% wage, 3%, if you're going to have a pensions contribution, it is kind of one pot of money, so you can adjust one thing or another. But I think the way we've kind of approached them is that it's not something that, the city has so much money, and we need to make sure that it's handled responsibly, and, if whatever improvements to the contract are made, they're not going to be at the detriment of the city, because what's going to happen the next time around is it's going to be the city asking for more next time. So it's about finding that balance so that it's an amicable relationship. But that's kind of the framework, is that they want the city to be healthy so that everyone can stay employed, and we want them to be, well-compensated employees so that they're happy and doing their job. And it is about finding that balance so that one side doesn't feel taken advantage of, and then there's repercussions the next round.
Have you ever been through binding arbitration?
I have not been through any 312 yet.
Any follow-up questions? Mayor Pro Tem?
Oh, I just asked that question. City
Oh.
Manager.
Yeah, you did. I must be getting tired. City manager can sometimes find themselves in a tug of war between departments with competing resource needs, residents or neighborhoods with rival desires, city council members with various priorities or policy positions. What is your go-to strategy in dealing with conflict or different viewpoints?
I think when conflicts do arise, because there are limited resources, I think that's when it's important to have maybe kind of a work session about some hot topics that we need to figure out how we want to address as council and managers, figure out how we want to deal with a department needs or a neighborhood's needs, and figure out if we can think of some creative ideas. I can provide a recommendation to council for a couple options for some of these items that are outstanding, and we can go over them. But I think kind of having a work session is when something gets to a head is important.
Any follow-up? Mr. Bachman?
Tell us a story about an employee who you work with, who you are most proud of, and what happened to get to that point.
I would say one I'm very proud of is our current code enforcement officer. He kind of, we had one that was fired, and then he kind of stepped into the role. He also worked on working on erosion certificate, and then he also was helping out significantly when we were dealing with the high water. Like, I would work with him when we were scheduling, if someone needed sand delivered to their house for a neighborhood, like sandbagging activity. So I feel like he's been one that just when things happen, he's been there getting through the issues, and he stepped up a couple times. Been proud to work with him.
Did you contribute to his success in any way, and if so, how did you contribute to his success?
I feel I did. I would, if we're managing the list of who needs what, I'll make sure DPW, I'll talk to them about dropping off, the supplies. Whenever he sends something my way about needing, this person's being difficult, making sure I'm handling that, calling them back. So it is something where it's, having each other's back. I think it's important for a good working relationship.
Any follow-up? Ms. Beaton?
What are some of the most effective tools you have found to recruit and retain talent? Give us some specific examples of how you've used them.
I think allowing some autonomy so people can be creative in their jobs, and I think that's important for people to feel some ownership and some satisfaction with their day-to-day. So I think, in our Parks and Rec, we have a department director who's taken on the farmers market. He's booking bands, getting food trucks, and then he does these Facebook Lives every time. And it's kind of, we kind of tease him about it, but he kind of just owns the, he makes a show of it, and he's doing a good job. So I think allowing autonomy and letting people use their strengths, and I think everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, and I think if given some autonomy, they're going to shine where they're going to play to their strengths.
And how do you reward them?
Well, telling them they're doing a good job and attending his events, things like that. But yeah, just making sure they know they're appreciated.
Okay.
Ms. Sullivan?
What tools and techniques would you use to keep the community informed and participating partners in the local government?
So we mentioned having some more town hall meetings, but making sure the website is giving accurate information, making sure that we're sending out press releases to the newspaper so that people are informed of what's going on, and letting you know making sure we're bullet pointing the opportunities for involvement and upcoming events, things like that. Social media as well can be used, but yeah, making sure we're making sure we're getting the information out. We need to do flyers, things like that.
Any follow-up?
I'm just curious, in your current position, how many times a month do you reach out to, the regular sources of media, TV, newspapers, social media? How much contact do you have? Do you keep track of that?
So, yeah, it's not a metric we keep track of, but for example, we have the news flash on our website. I have them post that, we're having a social district event this Saturday that was posted yesterday, and our Cool Cities committee will create an event on Facebook and then boost it. So it is kind of dependent on when events are happening and things, but I think quantifying it is a good way to make sure you're doing that too. So that's a good idea.
Just could you pick off the top of your head,
okay,
average number of reaching out and?
I would say probably maybe about 4 or 5 times a month.
Okay.
Something like that.
Thank you.
Any other follow-up?
What is the most important skill a manager can have when it comes to council-manager relationships? Can you tell us about a time when you had to rely on that skill to build on relationships?
Well, I think a good manager kind of you end up learning what each council member's priorities are, and you kind of know before you bring an item forward. Like, I'll just say that it didn't take long knowing that they want to see, if they want to see a bid tab, all the different documents. They want to make sure that a certain item goes to a committee first for some input. If they're a stickler about certain areas are having pothole issues, and I think making sure that that's done before the next council meeting, or it should be done right away, obviously, but you kind of know what certain council members are gonna be looking for, and I think that's something that you figure that's part of that is an important part of a good council manager relationship, is for the manager to anticipate what council members are going to expect with each item in these meetings.
Any follow-up? Mr. Kowalski?
We are coming up on your third-year evaluation. As you are looking back at our progress, what will we have accomplished together that will define success for you and for our residents?
I would say getting the aerial fire truck, getting a good solid budget with the motor pool rents charged each department, having that completed, making sure we're making impactful use of any infrastructure funding we receive, making good use with the CARES Act funding, addressing blight, communicating with residents through the website, through town hall meetings. I think that would be a good thing to say we've done in 3 years. Might be some other ones too, but also ADA compliance with park equipment as well, and getting some streets fixed up.
Any follow-up? Mayor Pro Tem?
Fit between a community and manager goes both ways. What attributes must a community or organization have before you are willing to go to work for them?
So I think a community that, I think, knowing that it is a community, and that I think having the volunteers like Manistee has, and having all the different amenities, I think it's easy to work for a community that takes a lot of pride in themselves and expects excellence, because then it's motivating. And I think just having high standards for themselves and for the community makes it something that is motivating to a manager.
Any follow-up?
Yes. We do have an above average aging population in the city of Manistee. So finding volunteers is somewhat of a challenge, especially if it's something that's labor intensive, like weeding the river walk or that kind of activity. So, and there is also a reluctance to allow, new development to come in. The first time that people hear about it, there's a segment of people that are very vocal that are against change, or it takes them a long time to embrace it. We need to change the hearts and minds of the community so that it has a more positive outlook. What can you bring to the table to help with that?
I think the challenges when change can be hard for people, but I think, yes, it has to be looked at as an opportunity, though, and you have to look at kind of the benefits of what we can see. And I think a lot of times when you hear about something new coming in, I think focusing on the positive attributes, or what the community's going to gain from it, whether it be more employment, more tax revenue that can be used for, for addressing blight, or getting money for another, recycling, cardboard recycling bin, something like that. So I think focusing on what the community is going to gain rather than the perceived loss, because I think people tend to think that I think people focus more on what's being lost than what's gained. You have to make sure that that's out in front. So I would make it an effort to show the positives, so that it doesn't get dragged down from the negatives. That's what I'd bring. I'd make that a priority to talk about those positive things that we gain.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Being a city manager, you got to be really organized. How do you stay organized?
I use a lot of different methods. I have a whiteboard that I kind of have the bigger projects on. I have all different tools. I set up a work order management system where people can directly send in requests. They go to the responders, and then they escalate to the managers after a certain period of time. So I can check that to make sure that items are being addressed. But then I have deadline dates in my calendar. I have we have negotiation folders on it. So it's a wide variety of things to stay organized. But I think I think the whiteboard's probably been the best tool. Just that I have the big things coming up in the next. I almost have like the things that are immediate but not important. You have those four. Making sure that you never keep the eye off the important but not immediate, and that's what I have a lot of those on my whiteboard in my office.
We all have strengths. What do you consider your two biggest strengths, or two most important strengths?
I think I'm hardworking and diligent, and I think that's served me well in this field. So like I said earlier, I keep at projects till they're completed, and then I don't forget about things, and I think that's been a big part of my success in my career.
Any follow-up? Now it's your turn. If you want to make a closing statement, you can.
I would like to address Councilman Bachman. I think we spoke after the last interview, and for some reason during the interview I didn't quite know what you were getting at, but it was very obvious after we talked for just 2 minutes after, and I think it's a good point that You do need a decisive leader, and if someone's given a direct order, they need to follow it, or they should be written up for insubordination. And I think at the time I wasn't sure if I wanted to say I would fire someone over an apology, but understood if that's what's been decided and that's a direct order, they have to follow it. And if they, if I'm wrong, and I'm going to be held accountable for that, but they need to follow an order.
Well, I appreciate you giving it some thought, because it was important to me for you to be able to tell me you could be a boss.
No, I apologize. I didn't see it at the time, but it was very obvious after we talked for just a minute after. So
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
None of up here understood either, just so you know. I got a little heat for that. Oh, I could take the heat. It wasn't that big of a deal.
You were passionate about it. I knew I was definitely missing something, and I'm glad you included me in.
Well, just to fill in the gap, every question I asked you was based on my own personal experience of working here. Every situation I asked you was something I had experienced here working for the city, so they weren't just like off the wall things. They actually happened in a small town. So, thank you.
No, I appreciate it.
Do you have any questions for us?
I asked my questions last time. I guess I would. I think my question for you is: did I address any concerns, or do you have any concerns that you didn't feel I addressed? If you could ask me, I'd appreciate it. And
Any questions or concerns?
Nope.
You all good?
I think you did a much better job this time around. You're a lot less
Thank you.
nervous.
We're much
thank
more
you for bringing
assertive.
me back. I appreciate it.
Much more assertive. I like that. You'll be hearing from Mr. Anderson, our decision. We thank you a lot for coming back again. We appreciate it. Any more questions, council? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you again.
We're going to continue on with our meeting. We're not done until, I think it's 11:30 is when we quit. Good job. Consideration of scheduling a special meeting on Tuesday, July 13th, to consider making a conditional offer of employment to the successful city manager candidate. Once the interviews have taken place, it is expected the council will engage in public discussion with the goal of selecting one of the candidates for a conditional offer of employment. Before the final stage of hiring process can be executed, a motion should be offered to extend a conditional offer to a candidate who secures a majority of support from city council. The offer is conditional to allow other due diligence steps to occur to enable withdrawal of the offer depending on the results of that research. Due to the gravity of this decision, council allow for additional time to contemplate and schedule a special meeting prior to the work session on Tuesday, July 13th, to extend a condition of offer to a candidate who secures the majorities of support from City Council. At this time, council could take action to direct staff to schedule a special meeting for Tuesday, July 13th, to consider making a conditional offer of employment to a successful city manager candidate. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
I have a motion to support. Any discussion, comments?
We have a general time we're looking at
A general time on, it would,
on Tuesday. Is it going to be early afternoon, or is it going to be just prior to this?
Just prior to the meeting, that's the way I took it.
yeah, I mean, it would be scheduled prior to the work session. At times in the past, it's been at 7, you have the special meeting and then have the work session after, but we could do it at 6 or 5:30, whatever council's preference would be.
It's council's preference.
I think 6 would help.
6 would be good.
6 o'clock?
Yep. Does that work for you?
Yeah, no earlier than that.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? Please take the roll.
Councilmember Bachmann?
Yes.
Councilmember Beaton?
Yes.
Mayor Zielinski?
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Schmansky?
Yes.
Councilmember Grabowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Martin Pontiac?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. Officials and staff, Mr. Bradford, do you have anything additional?
I don't, thank you, Your Honor.
Laura? Do you have anything?
Did we miss, were we supposed to have a comment,
Well, yes,
citizen comment?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's
I
late.
don't know if we have any,
It's
but
past my nap time. Are there any citizens who'd like to make comments? Any comments, any concerns? Hearing none? Now we'll go to Mr. Bradford and Laura. Do you have anything, Laura?
nothing, Your Honor.
How about city engineer?
Nothing, Your Honor.
City police?
I have nothing, Your Honor. Thank you.
Fire?
Nothing, Your Honor. Thank you.
DPW?
Nothing, Your Honor.
I think planning and zoning was back there. Do you have anything?
Thank you.
Did I miss anybody?
Kelly,
Yeah.
she's running the city manager's office right now.
Kelly, do you have anything? Thank you. Okay. Council members, I'm not going to call on you. If you got something, speak up. All right.
I have quite a few things. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I'm kidding. Oh, I'm so sorry.
We're adjourned.